Are we waiting for anybody?
Which
Just the button. Works. Thanks for coming, everyone. Can you do roll? Here.
here? Here.
Mr. Evans,
Here.
Mr. Winterhalter,
Here.
Shimon
Shimon, he's not coming.
wasn't listening.
What?
Guy,
Oh,
Not present.
okay. Okay, so we'll do a quick moment of silence and then the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Any of the members have any thoughts, comments on the agenda? Good.
Good.
Okay, first up, consider approving the minutes. I have not reviewed these, but if
I haven't seen them.
we'll put that off for another month. And then we'll move on to our first item, Stoney Knoll. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Get her done.
Okay. Last time we were here, this is our third appearance in front of the planning commission on the 27-lot subdivision on Wayland Avenue. The last two times, we've been focused a lot on stormwater management and how to alleviate and taking the concerns the residents along Hunt Valley Circle and Valley Lane and Echo Valley Lane. The last time we were here, we had a plan revised, and Dave Porter and McCombie didn't have a review letter, so we said, let's get the review letter for that and take a look at it. So we received Dave's review letter, and we thought it was pretty positive.
Is that the October 21 one that we're
Yes, it
looking
is.
at?
Yes, it
Make
is.
sure.
And I certainly don't want to put words in Dave's mouth, but as I read this, there were 80 some comments from the previous. 53 of them have been resolved. Of the open issues, the comments, 4 or 5 of them deal with waivers that we have to discuss. And other ones are kind of details. details about, make this change to the detail, check this calculation and things like that. So how I interpret it, like I said, once again, I'll give a comment on his own is I think we're in pretty good shape, especially with respect to the stormwater management.
Excellent.
Just trying to think the best. So I just did a quick kind of run through a lot of these, say, issues resolved. Just trying to think, do you want to run through your waivers and then we'll circle back to anything that's open that Dave thinks we should touch on that's not kind of perfunctory
That would be
engineering
fine.
process?
Yep. One of the waivers is to waive the requirement for a curb along the roadway.
Can you tell us which number that is? Just so we,
Okay.
I have it as comment 29.
Thank you. 29, so the requirements, Newtown requirements require a roadway with a curb. And as we discussed on numerous occasions, our stormwater approach to this is not to have all the stormwater come into the street, into the inlets, into the pipes that are straight into the basin. Ours is to have a roadside swale, intercept some of the water, slow it down, and even take some of it away. So that's the reason why we asked for the waiver, is to not impede the stormwater from going into the infiltration trenches and the swales along the road.
ultimately, we think the stormwater impact is positive as compared to if we just did the typical where we went into the road and into the inlets.
That's correct. So putting curb on the street as a typical street would have would concentrate that runoff. You'd have to take it all to an inlet to collect it, getting it into a stormwater system, and then pipe it to an infiltration basin or underground bed. This allows that road runoff kind of filter through a lawn area as well. There'll still be somewhat concentrated runoff through swales, but there will be interim inlets picking them up, piping them to infiltration trenches that are installed periodically along those swales. So you'll get the benefit of volume reduction as well as rate reduction with that stormwater approach. So I think, we're not opposed to granting that waiver request. I do want to point out that it does tie in with another waiver request that they're making for sidewalks through the community as well.
Say that
So-
again.
It ties
The
into
waiver
20.
request ties in with their other waiver requests for sidewalk, for the requirement to put sidewalks through the development.
You can't have
So-
a sidewalk and then no curb, doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So typically, if you're going to require the sidewalks, you probably would want to require curbing as well.
Right.
Fair.
I mean, I see this kind of a precedent issue is, we've really made an effort to get sidewalks. And, I can certainly see the logic and I can see that there's a positive side to it.
I have a question. How wide is the road?
I believe they have it at 24 feet.
24 feet, yeah.
Correct.
There would be room for walk.
There's also.
Following up, is there a way to avoid the curbs and the sidewalks and widen the road to allow for space for people to walk or run along the road? Don't put in the curbs, don't put in the sidewalks, add the swale, help out the water runoff, but have some space. Because I drive down there, that can get a little, dicey, cars coming up, cars coming down, there's not a lot of space, somebody's running. But if I get the reason for not the curbs and the sidewalks, and that's helpful to the water runoff, but can they widen it I think that's maybe if there was a little more space for people to come up and down.
If I may, what was talked about before, and I understand the walkability of the neighborhood, we would be willing to either put sidewalk along Wayland Avenue and I know there's no other sidewalk on either side, or put up some type of escrow if sidewalk was ever to be constructed along Wayland to make that more of a walkable area. We don't have any objections to that.
Yeah, I kind of always thought you'd put it there. I mean, because we just need to move people around the township. I mean, you're a cul-de-sac neighborhood.
Oh, I forget, there was some, it was that or a little trail somewhere or something.
Right.
There was an alternative discussed.
Right, we just need to be able to move people safely
Yeah.
from one end, to the other. Because once it's built, they're never going back.
Once
No,
what's
reality.
built.
Once this development's built,
Yeah,
we're gonna look up, if we look up and say, geez, we probably would have liked to have had a trail, sidewalk, or some method to
or
Traverse.
space for people to.
traverse from south to north or north to south, I might have backwards.
It's a busy road.
Who should be asked the question as it relates to, is there enough space for people to walk if there's cars coming where they can get off the road?
Well, it's 26 houses, right? You're gonna do a cul-de-sac?
I'm saying the Wayland section.
Well, that's going to have a sidewalk, right? That's what I wanted to make
They've
sure.
agreed to a sidewalk.
Yeah, they were,
Okay,
So Wayland, right, this property is built off of Wayland
I
Road.
misheard that.
Right.
So,
That's all I wanted to clarify.
so you're talking about interior.
That's right.
All right.
Well,
I'm
there's
okay
two.
with
I mean,
that.
I think they would prefer a waiver for both. I think what you're
I'm
saying is
good
you're
with the
inclined to
no
say,
sidewalk.
oh, not a
Yeah,
waiver
on the
for along Wayland
interior,
Road.
I don't
Yeah.
have an issue with
Yeah,
what
right.
they're doing.
Agreed.
yeah,
But this is not
Agreed.
high traffic.
Fair enough.
And I would make
Fair
note
enough.
that we're currently going through an audit with the Pennsylvania Environmental Council, keep saying economic, but it's Environmental Council. And one of the things they're recommending that we do is change our ordinance to allow for this type of stormwater management in neighborhoods. And so, and I believe, I don't know what the board's decision is going to be for sure. I can not speak for the board. However, for what I have talked to them, they weren't opposed to that concept. So I think that this is a positive step towards our thoughts towards sustainability as a community. And so I think we want to support that in doing so. So if in moving forward, if we can at least figure out the Wayland Road piece, because I do think that's important for future as we go, because that road is difficult. But within the subdivision, I think we would really want to support
Agreed.
the
I think a bigger issue in the community is the water, and on an internal development on these roads, 24-foot, they can walk, I think, fairly safely.
Yeah, good to go.
Right.
what's our standard road width, like for a neighborhood?
20
I believe it's 27 feet for a neighborhood like that.
So
And
is it,
just to clarify, so what they're doing with the stormwater on either side of the road, that's, so they have a 50-foot wide right of way. So from right of way
That's
to
the
right of way, the
sidewalk
grading
space.
and the swales, and then the road cross section are going to take up that entire 50 feet. So if you widen the road, you lose the opportunity for the stormwater management along the.
Right,
road.
it's effectively replacing the sidewalk with the swale.
Correct.
okay, I can get comfortable with that.
I'm good.
I think that's a good trade.
Yep.
Okay, so that's the, if I hear that correctly, that's the curb and the sidewalk waiver.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other one is a pipe, it's number 86.
Number, I'm sorry again.
86,
The number
86. And this is, we use this typically, this is just pipes. They require reinforced concrete pipe in the ordinance, but typically we don't use reinforced concrete, it's HDPE
And
pipe.
we do this every time.
Yep.
Yeah,
Check the box.
Yeah, we do that every time.
So good.
So there's just, I'm reading on, so I've got a waiver request 2 is the sidewalk. It looks like number 3, number 29 is number 3.
Three.
Is that correct? And is there one before that that would be number 1?
there is one other, there is 4 altogether. I think the first couple of meetings we were talking about possibly 3, but during the review, there was one more that I think we need to bring up. And that is number 14.
Yes, let's just make sure we touch all those.
Yep. Yep. Now, in the ordinance, they have a requirement for what is called a block. A block isn't very well defined, in my opinion, and I was having a hard time trying to figure out exactly what a block is. I always thought a block was the length along 2 streets where you're at, where all your parcels are at. But the way our 2 streets intersect Wayland Road, there's a difference of about 387 feet, 345 feet. But technically, there's a minimum block of 500. Now, once again, I don't quite understand the interpretation of the blocks, but I do know that there are many intersections in Newtown like that, where you have 2 streets coming down into another street and it's a residential block coming around. Some of them are old, some of them are new, some of them are illicit, or some of them are all over the place. So for the sake of just a misinterpretation, I have no problem requesting a waiver for this.
I don't even understand it. So we're saying, I apologize, I just don't even get it. Is
This-
it because
that
there's
space
these
is
2
too
streets?
narrow.
Right.
That
okay,
space between the 2 streets
Yes.
is too narrow.
Okay.
Is there ingress and egress out of both streets?
Yes.
Is there a stop sign at the Road A?
Yeah, both of them will have stop signs also, yes. And most likely with a sidewalk, they're going to be ADA and pedestrian crossing also.
I'm so sorry. Did we say we're going to escrow for the Wayland sidewalks?
Or I thought that, but I think, or is that an open item now, exactly how to do it?
Yeah, exactly how to do it, but either way, we'll, if you want us to put it on the plan for concrete sidewalks, we'll do that. The only reason why I ask this is because I know in some other cases, if you build a sidewalk and there's nothing
To
there,
nowhere.
it's better to kind of keep it in the bank and build up so you can do the whole thing, but that's
I
up
don't
to
want
the
to lose sight
township.
of that.
There's
Because
no
we
sidewalk on
dug
either
into
side
it, but we
present.
didn't finish
Correct.
to Wayland.
Right.
Pardon me, my brain just caught up.
There-
with that.
Right, so they're fine building it, and they're fine giving
There's
us
no
money.
sidewalk on either side.
So we're not,
Whichever side. Okay, no issues.
is there a political concern?
I think the board will decide which way they want to go. I mean, if you grant the waiver with either, the board would probably pick which one's the best at this time. I know we're wanting sidewalks being built. This is a kind of unique situation that I don't anticipate the connection being anytime soon. And so, but at the same time, I would argue that if you don't build it, you never move
Never,
forward on the
right.
process. I'm going to say the board may want to weigh in on that one way or
Okay.
the other,
So we don't
whether
need to-
it would be a
Unless we have
funding
an
or.
overwhelming opinion, we don't need to. nail
I
it
just
right
think,
now.
yeah, I mean, if you have a
Perfect.
high recommendation, what they do, I
Yeah.
think you ought to do that. But if you don't have a recommendation other than, we think that it either should be built and or escrowed, you could put that in and let the board come up with a plan.
The walkability of the community, though, under the comprehensive plan focuses on walkability in the commercial areas. The comprehensive plan really doesn't say walkability in every residential area.
Let's just say that we just did a whole greenways and trails study that
Clearly,
is
trails are
actually.
favored. Clearly, trails are favored.
No, but I'm saying that the whole issue that we're addressing is walkability, and that's one of the areas that we're addressing that needs walkability. That road, what's White Horse Wayland together,
Yeah.
is one of the places that they're looking at as a connection point. If you go back to our trails and greenways, and when we talk about trails and greenways, we understand that not every trail is trail as you and I define trail. For example, the board last week just passed an agreement to go work with the multimodal grant that we got to actually put a sidewalk down Ellis Avenue, not a trail, actually a sidewalk. And so we see it as a combination of trails, sidewalks, all of those pieces for connection points. And so on some of the roads, it would be, a trail may be the best way to go. For example, going up along the Lister piece, that's a trail, right? We all know that, and that works really well. It actually gets people a little bit further from 252. It works really well in that way. But I think we're looking at each area as an individual type of area and say, this area, the best answer may be a sidewalk, this area, the best answer may be a trail.
Trail at Gable, trail at BPG, sidewalk connecting them along Ellis.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some connectivity.
Yeah, the key is connectivity throughout the township.
So why don't we,
So number
sounds like
14.
we can we'll make peace with that in some fashion. And we still have 40 some items, some of which don't seem to be too big a deal, but we want to just,
Get the highlights?
yeah.
Okay.
And then Dave can hop in if
The
there's something.
blocks
he
were
can-
okay with the blocks waiver? Oh, I'm sorry, I know I jumped around. I
That's fine.
apologize.
You know, anybody on the box issue, the width?
Block issue.
Block issue?
Yeah.
No.
I just, when we're talking about the block issue, I just want to, and we were just discussing over here, we just want to make sure that the plan takes into account then that the 7, is that right? Seven lots that are in the middle, 6 of those lots would have 2 front yards,
Yes.
front yard both sides.
Yes,
And then the lot that goes up against Whalen would have 3.
Like 20.
yes.
Yeah, okay, just want to make sure, I looked at the drawing and it appeared that the 2, Road A and Road B was shown as 2 front. I was not 100% on Whalen. And so I just wanted to make sure that we don't end up
No,
making it a non-buildable lot.
2 fronts. Still 2 fronts.
3,
You got Whalen, you got Road A, and then you got Whalen and Road B. So,
but there's only one, the lot's 1, right?
Lot 20 has fronts on 3 sides, I think is what he's saying.
Right.
Yeah, I'm saying lot 20 has 3 front yards.
Fronts on 3 roads, A, B, and Wayland. It's the center one.
oh, the one by the cul-de-sac.
No, not at the
No,
front.
Up front.
It's the center one that
Borders
fronts on
Wayland Road
Wayland
and 2
and
new
one
roads.
side's A and one side's B.
Yeah, it looks
In the
like,
middle, the first one. in the
Yes, I'm
middle.
sorry, you're right.
It's your short block.
Yep, yes.
yeah, if you look at sheet 4 of 29, which is the partial subdivision plan, that sheet shows the setback lines on each lot. Some of them have a typical dimension on them. If you look in the middle of that plan sheet, lot number 20 is all the way to the left against Whalen Road. There is a 20-foot storm drainage easement along there, but the dimension is from the right-of-way line to the setback line. If you look toward the bottom of the page, along lot 19, it does show 75 feet for front yard FY. And then if you look at lot number 22, which is basically dead smack in the middle of the page, on the top is 75 feet and on the bottom is 75 feet. Those are both off of Road A and Road B. So they do show front yards.
So I guess my issue for your consideration, right, is okay, somebody comes in and they want to put up a shed, right, in the backyard. Where's the backyard on these lots?
Well, I guess typically when you have a double frontage, it's just somebody, whatever the driveway is, then that becomes the backyard. You could still keep a 75-foot setback from it, but you could say that could be the side yard and that's where you could put in the additional shed or whatever.
In the side yard? You're saying the backyard, you're saying one of them's a backyard?
Yeah, one will, from the zoning perspective, obviously all 3 will have 75-foot setbacks, but wherever the driveway is, the opposite would become the backyard, and that's where.
And I guess that's
Does
my
our
point
zoning
is
allow
this going to be a condition of approval that all entries will be on one of the roads so that they're all backyards on the other side, and then there could be,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, rather than alternating lot by lot.
Right, because, like the first person in, I want my driveway here. The guy on the other side, well, I want my driveway going that way.
Yeah.
It blocks my view of Venus, or I don't want to blow up the earth.
Right. You get all the kids' gym on one side and then you get the nice front yard on the
Right,
other.
Right,
That's fine, that's fine.
okay.
For big enough lots, I don't think that would be an issue.
And there's no other elements of the zoning that would say it would override where the physical front of the house is and just simply say there's a road there. So like that doesn't come into play. Ever. We can't, are we allowed to arbitrarily say this is the front and this is the back? Or do our zoning laws say this is the front and this is the back?
Typically, the way it works is, right, your street frontage is the front. On a corner, you have 2 fronts.
Okay.
right? And then
Right, like
so
this
you need
property
zoning.
number.
I don't know what the answer is with three. I don't think the zoning
26
code
has
covers
2
it.
fronts.
I don't think we have a problem with putting a condition on the plan that says lots 20 through um,
26.
class 26 will all come, will all have access to the street on Road B. I don't think that's an issue.
Yeah, I
Right.
realize that. I'm just wondering, does the previous language in our zone, it's a question, there's no layered intent behind it, it's just a fact-finding question, is do our zonings override our theoretical discussion about where the front and the back is?
Our zoning says that if you front a road,
Then by definition, the
by
other side is
definition,
back.
that's a front, and you have to have that setback, which they've met.
Gotcha.
But my point is, I don't know that it does meet that if you put a shed out there.
That's,
And so,
that's the question.
and so I think we can designate here that, which side is going to be the front for the purposes of land development, which is going to be the back for purposes of land
Right.
development. Perhaps you screen back a little bit for these folks since their backyard's going to face a road. I don't know if anybody's thinking about that, but from a zoning perspective, I don't know that we can just say, oh, well, you can put a shed inside the setback because we consider it your backyard. Pursuant to the zoning code, I think those folks have to come in and get it.
That's my
Variance.
question.
Which-
Yes, okay.
I don't think it's a terrible burden, but it is a burden for those homeowners.
It is.
That's the way I'm looking at it.
So I just wrote this up. If this is what we're saying, center block lots 20 through 26 will have either the front will be on road A or be uniformly for all lots. Do we care whether they pick A or B? Any reason? They just have to pick one.
I think that's right.
Why do we have to say that? Why can't they front on Wayland?
They can't because only one house.
Well, but they're not
currently
gonna
goes
get,
on
they're not
Wayland.
gonna get a curb cut for a driveway off Wayland, I don't think.
No,
Yeah.
Not with having 2 entrances already.
No.
Right.
Now
So
that
they-
block issue.
So 20 is on Wayland, but the rest, they just have to pick A or B. And it's the front and it's the back.
20's not on Wayland. 20's gonna be front
Yeah,
or back like
there's
everybody
20.
else.
20
No,
is-
we already have 2 curb cuts. They're not gonna have a
No,
driveway.
I know that.
I know,
was-
but it's
I was
just-
just
you're
saying
just
that's
saying
the
it's
only
all-
lot.
Oh, yeah, gotcha. Okay.
That's the only
Okay.
lot with the 3, but then, every other lot going
Right.
straight down beside that one has two front yards essentially.
Okay, with everyone?
I'm okay.
So you want to make 20 to 26 so they all face the same way?
Right.
Okay.
And
That's the builder's election.
Yeah, they just pick one, A or B.
Developer's election.
Mhm.
Fair enough.
Okay, so what next do we have?
It was 14.
Yes.
Just to, so for instance, we were just talking, if somebody wants to come in for a pool, right? In addition to a shed. So I mean, is there, if we pick one side as the front, your entranceway, is the back going to be buffered in any way to, or is that just going to be on the
Just-
homeowner?
There's a house on the other side of the road is looking
Yeah,
at
I'm
the
looking
pool.
at the back.
Yeah,
Right,
Or the
right, because
shed.
it's going to look like a,
jigsaw puzzle or like, or what was?
Is that-
yeah,
There's not a lot of
Does that mess with-
contour to the
does that
lot,
mess
that
with
like
your
you would
stormwater?
lose it.
no, that wouldn't mess with the stormwater at all. No, that's fine, because all the lots drain to the road, so that shouldn't be any problem at all. I mean, to be honest with you, I would, like you said, when the person comes in for the permit, either for the house or for whatever accessory structure they want to put in, then I think it's just up to the township to say, you got to treat it like, because there are double frontage roads, and it's not like someone can't put anything in the one that they don't pick as the actual frontage. It's just that for zoning reasons, it's called a double frontage road, and you have to make sure you have the zoning setbacks from each at 75 feet. In other words, you can't have a front and back, you gotta have 2 back, you gotta have 2 fronts. But I don't think there's any restrictions that I know of that you would be able to say, you can't put a backyard accessory structure in there simply because there's no backyard. If I said that right.
Would they be inside the setbacks? That's the concern.
Well, accessory structures don't need to be inside the building setback. They have their other setbacks associated.
Uh-huh.
Is there, in considering this, that there's gonna be one street, be it road A or B, wherever you decide the fronts to be and wherever you decide the backs to be. One of those streets is gonna be, the other side of the street is gonna be looking at a row of backyards. Is there gonna be a landscaping plan that kind of hides that?
Well, we don't, I mean, we show, I mean, basically the landscaping plan is trees. It's about trees and stuff like that. I don't think I saw anything in the ordinance about a buffer, because buffers are usually residential to commercial, or residential or industrial. You don't see too many buffers from residential to residential. So there's nothing in your code that says you would have to buffer the backyard of a residential property to a residential street.
I mean, given the scale of this development, if they're gonna sell houses, they're gonna have to figure that out.
Right, 'cause nobody's gonna
Nobody's
buy
gonna
a
buy
house looking at someone's
housing,
backyard.
housing at this scale.
It's not
That's
configured.
not nicely addressing this issue.
It's almost like every house on the one street is like a flag lot looking at the back of somebody else's house.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is when you go to build this thing and they're selling the lots, that, like you said, that'll be a selling point. And, you know, we don't have any objection if, I mean, like I said, there's nothing in the township ordinance says you need a buffer, but my guess is the marketer will say, you know what, let's put a buffer along the backyards. But that's a decision, I think, out of our hands at this point.
Right, yeah, you know.
Understood.
Okay, so we had, so number 6, error of closures for the parent track. I think that seems like a
That's just a calculation we can. put on.
engineering.
Yeah,
So won't comply or will comply?
we'll comply.
Will comply.
Which one was that?
Number 6.
6.
I think I'm just gonna kind of crank.
That's
it.
fine.
I think
Yes, go ahead.
Otherwise, too.
28 is another one.
Or is he gonna go?
Yeah, I'm just
I'm
gonna,
sorry.
yeah,
Okay.
I think
It's
we
more-
might miss, you know. 7, we have this issue's resolved. 8, signature certification issue resolved as noted. That one's,
Nine's good. Yep.
9's good. And
And is adding a note on the plan.
Just a note on the
will
plan.
comply.
Yep.
11's good, right?
11 is the sewage planning module, which we're gonna have to get for final. We're in the process of getting it now. We have to go through DEP and then all it's a long process.
Will comply.
Be in low.
So Jim, I got a question. You know, we're right now redoing our street tree ordinance, creating / changing. So the street trees here, not in the right of way. Because of the stormwater.
Yes.
Right. So there's going to have to be some sort of way, because pretty much, I believe, the way it's going to work is we're going to be regulating our street trees that are in the right of way, requiring replacement, requiring maintenance and things such as that. So we can have some sort of a covenant, you know, homeowners requirement, and a homeowners association will be responsible for the
Yes,
maintenance.
that's exactly the way.
Even though they're on the private
Yes.
property. of the individual.
Yes, we understood that there's obviously a street tree requirement. And we showed, and actually we showed that there's a number there that we have to put in. And we just figured that we would let the arborist say, okay, what's the best way
Right.
of putting these trees in here?
Sure. I just, and I know that's going to happen. It's afterwards for the maintenance and replacement.
It'll
That'll
be,
an HOA
it'll
responsibility.
be done
That'll
into
be
the HOA.
covenant.
Yes.
Now, do you see that as the part of number 12, or did it just trigger?
I was just looking at the plan. I didn't look at the number of. comments.
You know, 'cause I'm just trying to track what, you know, if we're gonna put forth a motion, what we need to cover.
No, I don't think it's number 12.
Yeah, that's what
Obviously.
I just added as a comment.
HOA shall require maintenance and or replacement of street trees consistent with township requirements.
And by the way, that's item 82. It's on my street trees.
I mean, the problem is, yeah, it's the trees being installed as street trees. I mean, they're technically not going to be street trees because they're going to be outside of the right of way. but we're gonna treat them as if there's street trees, and the HOA is gonna maintain them as if they're street trees.
Right, so I guess the HOA needs to define certain trees as street
Like
trees.
the trees being installed.
Capital
along-
T,
along
capital,
the-
capital S, capital T,
Yes,
street trees.
and we'll nail that down closer. when we
Yeah, you'll
get to
see
it.
the HOA and, right. Okay, so that was the fee in lieu. Would you, the fee in lieu is that, okay,
Yeah, for the recreational land.
number 12, yeah,
Yes, yep,
will comply.
we'll comply. 13 is steep slopes. We're staying away from steep slopes with the exception of the utilities, which is allowed. And I think Dave mentioned that there was a line in there. It looks like we crossed the steep slopes. Our intent is not
Minor
to.
adjustment.
Yeah,
Okay,
So will comply.
14 was the blocks.
14 was the waiver.
That's the waiver
15
one.
issue resolved.
Yep.
16 issue resolved, 17 issue resolved. 18 issue resolved, 19 issue resolved, 20 issue resolved, 21 issue resolved,
20, yeah,
22
little
issue
page.
resolved.
I have
So
the
I make
whole
note
next-
to the planning commission that items 20 and 21, they will be provided prior to the final plan approval. So they're related to traffic studies, both of the comments. And the requirement is if there's more than 25 residential units, a traffic study shall be provided. We're doing 27 units here, so by 2 units, it gets triggered.
So the-
Oh, okay. Next page, 23 to 27, I have resolved.
We went through.
There's another part of 27 that just
Another
basically
part of
says,
second package.
Yeah,
yeah, just
Pipe cross.
flared end sections and we'll comply on that also. It's just the detail of the cross pipes.
Is the
yeah, we
waiver
talked about waiver 2.
28 and
Same with-
29,
29.
they resolved.
32.
33.
Thirty-four, municipal authority.
Yeah, we put on the plan, it'll be, we're proposing to dedicate it to the township and actually it's to the municipal authorities. That's a note on the plan.
Will comply.
And that we will have separate easements and an easement agreement.
The next section, soil erosion sediment.
Dedication.
I think I have 36 is the only
Yeah.
open.
That's a small detail, we'll comply.
Dedication to the municipal authority for the sewer.
Yes.
8 is resolved. Okay, so let's get down to 42.
42, emergency spillway.
That is, once again, it's just a couple of, it says one thing on the plan and another thing on the other plan. The design is fine, it's just a matter of catching up, so we'll comply.
Plan and calculation consistency.
Stormwater management. Emergency spillway.
If this is basically the same issue that we'll resolve it. And Dave asked me to just go down to the site and look around it and see some of the impact, which I did. And I did see that, and I'm more positively assured that I think we're going to improve the drainage in that area by controlling it and concentrating as opposed to letting it come downhill. So that's what I got out of that. I didn't know if there was any action on that particular.
Well,
There's a recommendation.
43. This is something that the planning commission had a significant number of comments and questions about. At the last couple of meetings, we had a subsequent meeting after the last planning commission meeting with a few residents from that area. Prior to that, the last planning commission meeting, a resident attended and expressed concerns about the proximity of the stormwater basins to their property, which is kind of you look at the plan all the way to the right-hand side of this property.
Yeah.
So
There are some of the other
Basin
pictures.
2 is pretty much right at the property boundary there. So what we discussed engineering wise, that the basin's going to function properly. It's designed to handle the right volume, the right rate reduction it's going to provide. The basin grading is shown right up to the property line. And just from my personal experience being out there during the sanitary sewer project, that most of the farm area drains right to that property line and then through the property line. So Mr. Gate is correct. I do believe it will positively impact the drainage coming to that point. It's just a matter of where the emergency spillway is situated with that basin. It's directed toward that property instead of, I guess, toward the top of the plan. It's kind of toward the right side of that plan. So that was one of my concerns. They addressed that by getting some additional infrastructure in the emergency spillway itself by putting kind of an under drain or a trench drain through the emergency spillway so that if in an emergency situation, the basin does overtop and goes through that emergency spillway, it will be collected and then discharged into the piping to go down to the level spreader near the creek, which is kind of a belt and suspenders improvement to that stormwater design. The larger concern is with regard having the grading right up to the property line. It's one, if that thing clogs, it's still going to be discharged to that direction. So we did talk about possibly adjusting the location of that spillway or adjusting the location of that basin a little bit to allow a little bit of space between the property line and the bottom of the grades there in order to direct that drainage away from the property instead of allowing it to come through the property, but direct it toward the corner of the property. So that was my personal larger concern with basin number 2. We also did discuss the stormwater management to the middle of the site, which is going to collect what was called watershed number 2. So if you recall, the overall development was basically split into thirds. So watershed 1 was all the way to the left-hand side of the plan. Watershed 2 was the middle third, and watershed 3 was the right-hand third of that plan. Watershed 2 is to be collected. Most of it's going to be collected by the street inlets, the swales, and then piped to basin number 2. A portion of it is going to be allowed to run overland to an inlet, kind of in a sump condition, immediately adjacent to the properties to, I guess it's the southwest of the site. So we did talk about that at length with the planning commission and with the other residents that attended the subsequent meeting. And in fact, I did go out and meet with the resident that owns the property immediately to the south of there, and did look that there is evidence of existing erosion issues from stormwater running off to the low point there. It's allowed to pond, and then it kind of overtops, and there's kind of an erosion gully through the property there. So what we talked about was maybe putting a couple more inlets in to as more of a fail safe. If one does clog, it's going to be allowed to overflow into another inlet and pipe to basin number 2. The other issue was with regard to if it doesn't get maintained, because that inlet's all the way in the backyard of one lot. If it gets neglected for some reason by the HOA or their contractor to do that maintenance, can we improve that area by constructing somewhat of a berm, or maybe even a landscape berm function can double as a belt and suspenders measure to ensure that that discharge isn't going to transgress the property line and affect the downstream owners. So Jim, I'll let you kind of, that was a lot to get out, but I'll let you speak to those issues.
Yeah, no, we'll comply
Jim,
with all this.
before you chime in, I want to say we often have contentious issues at the Planning Commission over the years. This is a very refreshing example of, we had some concerns at the last meeting. The residents had additional concerns. We had that individual meeting. you came, you showed up, Dave, I really want to note, make it noted that you went above and beyond.
Thank you.
You went out to the property and met with the individual. The individual called me and said, hey, thanks, I didn't know they did that. You guys then complied and said, hey, we agree, we're going to work on this together. And it looks like we've got this, which was, to me, was the hot button issue with the project. We got it somewhere, and I really want to applaud you, Dave, for pulling that along, that you did a lot of good work there. And you guys for seeing it and addressing it.
Thank you. And everything that Dave just talked about is, we will comply. It's actually not that big of a deal. And that is one of the benefits of the way we design the stormwater management, is that we're taking that stormwater away from that area and directing it to another basin. So there'll be significant improvements in drainage in that whole watershed too. The whole watershed. I mean, theoretically, it says 0, but we know it's not really 0, but it's going to be significantly less water coming down in that area.
Yep.
I agree.
Great.
Noted.
Thank you.
For 44 easement required for,
Yep, we'll comply. It's actually on one sheet, but it's just not on another sheet.
45 NPDS permit.
That'll be part of final stage. We'll comply.
46 erosion sediment plan.
Same thing.
47 testing for infiltration.
It's standard. We always test before we actually put the things in.
And Jim, something just occurred to me, hearing the infiltration testing comment. We had talked, there's 5-7 lots along the south portion of the property.
Yes.
Those will be serviced by individual on-lot infiltration beds. So the roof drains will be piped into those beds. That volume will be eliminated from runoff. It was just a drafting error that.
Every line's going to have its own.
All lots will
individual
have
for the roof drain.
Not just the bottom 7.
No,
All of them. All
Yeah,
The
27
original
will.
one didn't have it on.
Oh, I'm with you.
Yeah.
48,
We'll comply. The DP will probably require us to do that.
49 is resolved. 50,
We'll comply, same issue with the easement. It's there, but not shown on the right plan.
52,
Dave brought up that he wanted to get additional calcs to make sure that the water coming down the swales to the final inlets on Wayland Road do not overflow. So we'll provide additional calculations to show that it could take the 100-year storm.
I want to note that they did provide calculations showing that the storm drainage infrastructure, the piping, does handle the 100-year storm. I just want to be sure that the inlets can effectively allow the water to get to the pipes.
Into 'em, right.
erosion protection for all discharges. Issues resolved.
It's a
Never mind.
minor issue.
56,
56 is, we have no problem requesting or putting down if there's going to be a blanket easement. Instead of trying to fit, an easement within the 50-foot right of way where the trenches are, we just say it's a blanket easement, which would allow the homeowners, and in any case, the township had to jump in on there, that they had blanket easement to access all the utilities. And in this particular case,
Oh, so the property is number, 11, 12, 13, that's like 10, 11, 12, they would have blanket easements. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, well, any property that has a utility or an infiltration trench next to it, there'll be a blanket easement says we have the right to come on this property to fix anything that's wrong with the. It's better than trying to carve out another little easement here and another little easement here and another little easement here.
so an easement granted to the township.
Yes, well, it'll be part of I guess it'll be more of an HOA, because it'll be their responsibility if something goes wrong.
So they have an easement to work on it, but should they not
Yes,
maintain it, then the township has the right to come in and bill them for anything, if whatever. Okay,
So do we have
59.
to do something specific in our response to address that when we make a motion?
Rich?
No. I'll work with that.
No? Okay.
59,
it's Same issue. We will submit an erosion control at final.
One drainage areas.
It's a plan, a post-construction stormwater management plan that's required by PADEP. That'll be part of the final plan.
Two.
The thing about 62, this is one of those things where we talked about it and we added some additional things, 2 feet of amended soils at the bottom of the basin, which is actually on the plan. It's on a detail hidden. We do not have anything on the water tolerant plants to be provided at the bottom. We will do that, but I believe we were basically saying, I think, Tina, I think when the supervisors came in saying that they're going to develop one, and we said, fine, whatever the water plantings are that are suitable, we'll plant them. So I didn't know how to necessarily put that on the plan.
Infiltration bed calculations.
We'll comply.
Yeah. 65.
Detail, we'll comply.
Next page.
Sorry.
Down to 71.
That's the
Sewage
sewage plan
plan.
we'll get.
Pressure sanitary, conflict.
Yeah, it's just a matter of figuring out, we'll work with the sewer authority to make sure that it's the proper connection in the right location.
Yeah, that'll be the case for 72 and 74. They're both Newtown Authority related issues.
And then utility line, stream crossing permit.
That's a chapter 105 permit we'll get from DEP.
So the page is good. 79 Wayland Road.
That's, we're gonna put a curb gutter there at the intersection. We just didn't have a detail on it. We'll put a detail on it.
80 driveway lot 15.
Issue is resolved. Second line,
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
second sentence.
81.
Just a contour line off kilter. We'll comply.
82.
That's where we basically say, we know how many street trees we need and we'll work with the arborist to put them where they need. And that's where you also added the homeowners association note.
Right. And then 85.
Fire marshal gave us a letter. We responded, sent it back. We just didn't hear back from him yet. We had no issues with his notes and we fixed the plan as such.
Okay. So that 86 we talked about.
Yeah.
How do we do public comment? Can you name and address, whichever? Name and address. Can you make sure the microphone's on there? Is there a microphone there?
That sound like it is?
Yes.
Yes, perfect.
Richard Koenig, 195 Hunt Valley Circle. I came with 3 questions. The first has been summarily answered with the comments about improvements to the plan with respect to stormwater management from the last time you met. So I won't ask for any more about that. There's been mention of a meeting with residents. My second question was whether someone in an engineering capacity with the township could meet with residents in my neck of the woods. So, it would be along the houses immediately below the ones you see in the bottommost row of the development. I recognize we're asking for someone to take more time and
Not to
Well,
cut
there's
you
a way
off,
to
is
do
one of your
this.
neighbors with last name Singh?
I They are,
And the
they're across the street from
Jankowskis
us, yeah. Mhm.
and the Jank, they were at those meetings and plugged in with Dave. And
Okay.
just so you know that they have some background on it also, your neighbor,
Okay.
your direct neighbors.
Well, I know of, I'm interested, and I know of at least one other neighbor who would be very interested in meeting with someone for the reason that, if you're a layperson and you see plot plans and the like, and you hear a lot of explanations, that's all well and good, and it's all presented in the best of faith, but I think it would be helpful, and I think it would be reassuring to some of us if someone could just walk the property with us and so tell us what we're going to do. So that would be my request. If that would be possible, we recognize we'd have to work around the convenience of whoever would meet with us. Give me a time and place. You don't want to give it to me, I can give you contact details for someone else you could give it to. If we don't show, because we just can't make it, that's our problem. So that would be my request. My remaining question, you will at first take as impertinent, but let me explain. And this really is a question to representative for the developer, and that is whether the developer plans to build these houses, or get the plan approved, and then sell the property. I understand if the reply to that is it's nobody's business. But the reason I ask is that I don't know Mr. Nolan. I've never so much as shaken his hand. I've seen his developments. From what I can tell, he does a very good job. And a plan is only as good as its execution. So I think we're not asking anybody to hurry up, but if it's clear what the developer wishes to do, we'd like to know that. And if it's not, or if, as it would be within its rights to say, it's none of our business, I take that. So that's my final question. And you can give answer now, or I can get in touch with appropriate contact.
I think
persons
number
later.
2 is, really something you'll have to take up with the township, staff,
Mhm.
or an advisory board.
Yeah.
None of us sitting here are engineers.
Right.
Number one, you mean?
Huh?
Number one.
Oh, no, it's 3, I'm sorry, okay.
That was number 2. So number 2 is a request to meet with township, but we aren't the township,
Yeah.
so.
Number
Yeah.
1 was resolved, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Number 2 is an effort to just
I
sort
better
of
understand. the
have
plans.
someone point to features of the land and explain what was already said about number 1, which is,
In
I
listing.
agree with one commissioner. It's encouraging to see that people are trying to take comments seriously and respond to neighbors' concerns.
And then the third is back to the
Yeah.
applicant is
If
whether
you care to
they
comment,
care to comment whether you're.
you don't have to.
I'd say no comment at this point. I mean, we're not even up to final plan at this point. So I would just say no comment.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you very much.
Name and address, please, when you get up there.
Hey, good evening. My name is Eric Tegenfelder. My address is 170 Hunt Valley Circle. My wife Jennifer is here tonight as well, and she attended the last meeting. We're new to the development. We moved in at the end of July, so we're just getting familiar with this whole plan. If you'll notice where our property is, it's this one right here.
The one
And
that's
so,
immediately next to the basins.
correct,
The one you pointed to?
yes.
Okay.
And so to give you a visualization of that, at the top of the property here is where the horse fence is, and the horse come and look over our yard. On the side here is where the wooded area is, which is quite steep, and goes down to the stream. The stream is back here at the back of our property. So as you can see, the development is impacting our property sort of on 3 sides. One at the top because of that retention basin, second on the side because of whatever woods need to be cleared to make room for that drainage pipe. And then finally, at the bottom, the stream in terms of whatever impact the water flow will have on the stream itself. So I tried to review all the materials. I reviewed all the plans. I also, believe it or not, watched the whole video of the last meeting, all 2 hours of it. So I got familiar with all that to get grounded. I reviewed the plans and submitted a list of questions September 28th to the township. I did get a response from the secretary, Steve, saying that they would be submitted to the right people. So I appreciate that. But I'll try to break my comments into 3 basic parts. The first one is the water situation. So as I mentioned, we're on a slope property and there's water that flows down from above and then across our property and actually hits a retention wall that is above our pool. That's starting to affect the retention wall and causing it to lean on one side. We've had people come in to look at that, and they've mentioned that that leaning is caused by water impacting the wall over time. So we're concerned if there's going to be any more water flow from this development. From what I've heard, it's possible that there may be less, so that's good. The second area of concern is privacy. I think that you have addressed that appropriately, so that's not as big a deal, I would say. And then the third area of concern is basically what I would call setbacks, borders, and easements, because there are several aspects of this development that come right up to our property line. There's also an easement that's marked through our property. I'm not sure what that means, but that was my third area of concern. I guess this is the venue for the questions or comments that we can provide in addition to the list of questions that I submitted to the township. But I'll break it down into those 3 areas. So in the area of water, somebody mentioned it, if somebody wants to put in a pool or a patio or something like that, is there some kind of approval process for that impermeable surface? Because that impermeable surface will create additional drainage needs on the development itself that I don't know have been built into the calculations or not. Second point is, I think those drainage pipes from those 2 retention ponds that go down to the stream are going to be quite large. I forgot what the diameter was. Just a question on how those will be set, how they will be buried and designed, because again, those pipes are right next to our property line in the diagram there. So next question is, I think you mentioned it, kind of a belts and suspenders situation. If there is an emergency situation, how do we keep water from that retention pond from just rushing down our property and down the hill? Maybe if there's some kind of.
It might be more efficient. Go
Let's
back
take
to.
it one at a time.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
it's gonna all kind of, so you had the one question about impermeable surface around pools and things like that. I do believe that they're gonna do a calculation on that.
Sounds great. Okay.
Yeah, anytime that there's an addition after the subdivision has been completed. So just like if you wanted to put a pool, although I think you said you already have one, but if you
Right.
wanted to put a shed in, we would evaluate that based on stormwater, based on what's been done on the
Perfect.
property already. That would continue even after the project's complete.
And even each small little addition is cumulative. So you-
Okay.
You add each one.
Thank you. Perfect. Second question was, how will those large pipes get buried? These are the pipes here. Is that area going to be cleared with trees around it, or how deep will they be? I mean, what's the design there?
They're 32 or 36 inch pipes, and there'll be a trench excavated. We'll only clear the amount of trees, put in the excavation trench. So 36 inch trench pipe will probably require like a 5-foot trench. So we'll take out those trees and those trees only. Everything else on either side of the trees is meant to stay. So you're not going
Excellent.
to lose the forest. It's just where we cut the the pipe in is where we're gonna take out the trees.
Okay,
So my
perfect, thank
que- I
you.
have a question then. So you're doing a 2-for-1 tree replacement?
That is included in our calculation on the number of trees that we need to remove.
Okay,
And like I said, that's where we're gonna negotiate with the arborist, how he wants us to replace them.
got it.
It's quite a large number.
Yeah, I imagine so. Okay, sorry.
And Jim, so you explained the pipe coming down to the level spreader is going to be buried. So once that's stabilized, it'll grow up. And
Okay.
you won't notice that as much as the level spreader itself. Can you explain what that would look like?
Sure. The level spreader is the pipe that kind of runs on a diagonal in between the back properties. What that does is instead of one big pipe coming out and discharging all the water, it comes into another series of pipes, and it might be a little bit more complicated than that, that spreads along the length of the contour lines. So instead of it coming out, it comes out and then it spreads out and trickles out more of a bubbler type of
Okay,
fashion.
sounds great. Okay. Today, there is water that comes from here, this area, onto our property, off of the existing property onto our property and causes erosion. You can actually see a gully that's been formed from now water. So my question is, what will the contingency be right at the border to stop that from occurring with the new development? It sounds like you expect the retention pond to catch most of that, but again, if the retention pond has an emergency situation, what's to stop water from flowing across our property and causing more damage than there is already?
The emergency spillway is for an emergency. In other words, so as that basin functions, that's water will never get higher than that emergency spillway. Okay, so it goes through the pipes down into the pipes by the stream. If anything gets clogged, then it goes over the emergency spillway. Now, normally it would just go over the spillway, but what we did in consideration of the issues here, we're constructing a trench across the spillway. So if the water starts to go over the spillway, it goes into a trench.
Okay.
Like a concrete trench that will go back into the piping system. That was the whole idea of doing this. So even if there's an emergency, if there's a clog and overflows, it still won't be directed onto your property. It'll go down to the stream.
Okay,
And
thank
that's
you.
designed to cover the 100-year storm.
Correct.
Okay. Next question was whether all the excess flow from watershed 2 and watershed 3 retention go to the creek. What impact will that have on the creek? Will it cause flooding in the creek in our backyard? Have there been any calculations on that?
The amount of flow that gets there now, we're not allowed to increase that at all.
Okay,
So we're actually reducing it significantly in the 1 year, the 2 year, the 5 year. And then as it gets closer to the 100-year storm, it's still like 98% of what it used to be. So in either cases, it's getting reduced. That is
Okay.
the intent of stormwater management requirements. That's what we
Okay.
have to comply with.
and specifically addressing that creek, which goes to Crum Creek, I believe, right?
Yes.
Okay. Who maintains the drainage system? Well, what if the pond drains get clogged? What is the association procedure and budgetary property to address preventive maintenance? That's a direct quote. So,
There's a standard for all stormwater requirements in the state of Pennsylvania. There is a requirement of maintenance that is required before you get your permit. You have to put it on the plan. And what they're going to do is that maintenance is going to be the responsibility of the homeowners association.
okay.
And the township has inspection rights. The township actually can, township can actually go in and fix it, and charge it if it doesn't happen.
Oh, the township's the backup plan. Okay,
It's the
perfect.
enforcers, essentially.
Awesome. I like that.
That's what I was going to say. Sorry. No, you did a great job.
I don't know how it works in terms of stream maintenance. This is the first time I've had a stream on my property, but is there something we have to do to help maintain the stream as it collects this water?
There are actually best practices that
Well, I think right now it's a natural stream, and I don't know if there's any issues with it, but I don't think DEP would want you to mess around with the stream at all. That's the idea, is
Okay.
to leave it a natural stream unless there's an issue. And our intention is, like I said, we're not increasing the amount of water to the stream, so it's our expectation that unless a tree falls or something like that, that should stay the way it is. If you personally on your property want to do something with that stream, you'd have to go to DEP and they would highly encourage you not to mess with the stream.
Understand. Okay, thank you.
Unless you wanted to do riparian buffers and all that other stuff. I do want to reiterate Jim's point, the stormwater management code for Newtown Township does require, it has calculations you have to do to demonstrate you're not going to create stream erosion. So you have to meet rate control, so you have to lower the rate at which your stormwater discharges from the site, and you have to knock the volume down to below what the pre-development is. So both of those things are going to protect the stream as far as the development impact.
Okay, perfect.
I believe the DEP actually has like a best practices for
Yes, they do.
stream maintenance.
Correct.
So if you can actually look.
I can look it up. Sure. I know we did some mowing and we kept a 15-foot buffer, for example. So, okay. I think you answered the privacy question with the trees and things like that. So point number 3 is really around the borders and the setbacks and easements. So in that area, is there a required distance between the retention pond boundary and our property line? As you guys pointed out, the contour lines of basin number 2 come right up against our property. Can that be modified, or what's the requirement in terms of the easement or setback for that retention pond?
There is no requirement for easement, but Dave and I talked, and we're gonna push the pond. It's not gonna be significantly, but we're gonna push it away so that there's gonna be I don't even wanna call it a buffer, because that's not what it really is, but we're gonna push that up a couple of, not even sure high, but we're gonna push it away from your property line.
Okay, thank you.
So someone's not gonna grade right up to your property line.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yes.
Second is, there are several things on the plans in terms of 20-foot sanitary sewer easement, 20-foot stormwater easement, LPSS that goes through our property. I'm not sure what those are, but are they utility lines or what is that?
LPSS is low pressure sanitary sewer. You probably note on your deed when you bought the property, there's several easements that are on your property between Hunt Valley Circle and the back portion of your property where the stream is. I believe one of those is for an aqua water main. One is pretty much coinciding with where the authority's sanitary sewer main is. So there's a force main that goes through your property, which was granted by the prior property owner. And they're more or less in the same location, separated by about 10 feet. The low pressure sanitary sewer would service this proposed development, and what they're proposing is to use or piggyback on the authority's existing easement through your property. That there is a gap between the authority's easement and the property boundary. So to legally get from this development to that easement, they would need an additional easement through your property to get to that easement. And they're proposing to send that parallel to the authority's force main and discharge in Echo Valley Lane at the same location that the authority's force main discharges.
Right, okay, so I guess my thought is then, since the developer owns all that property above our property line, why can't the sanitary sewer go through the developer's property rather than our property?
It is, except for that location. I guess they could, and I don't want to speak for the developer, but they could look at alternatives, which would probably impact the tree cover along that property boundary. But yeah, that's certainly something that you're well within your rights to ask them to look at.
Okay.
Are you getting to the end? Probably because we need to keep.
Yep,
moving.
almost. Finally, yeah, where will the electricity, water, and gas lines be? Are those coming through our property as well?
No. Now, the only thing that's going on your property is we're going to piggyback on the existing easement that's already there for the sewer line to get to Echo Valley Lane. All water, all gas is coming off of Wayland.
Okay. Those are my comments. Thank you. And these were all submitted in writing on September 28th. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Any more public comment? Member comment?
No comment.
I think we've moved the needle.
Want me to make a motion?
Yes.
Okay. I will make a motion to recommend to the supervisors approval of the Stoney Knoll preliminary subdivision and land development plans last dated September 13, 2021, subject to compliance with the Herbert McCumbee letter dated October 21, 2021, in which issues were largely resolved and or indicated they would comply with the issue. Some additional items that we would recommend to the supervisors is that the center block lots, which are lots 20 to 26, will have either the front be on Road A or B uniformly for each lot, to be determined by the developer for the final plans. I'll get to the waivers last. And then the HOA shall require maintenance and or replacement of street trees consistent with township requirements, which shall be approved by township council as part of the HOA agreement. Right. And the street trees that may or may not be in the right of way, but will be defined in the HOA agreement. Recommend granting a waiver on the distance for the block, which is noted in our requirements at 500 feet. We recommend granting a waiver allowing 345 feet along Wayland Road between roads A and B. An additional waiver requesting that the development not provide sidewalks. So we recommend granting this request subject to this applying only to the frontages along Road A and Road B, subject to the provision of trenches along the roadways for stormwater management as discussed. I'll pause. On Wayland? We never.
Escrow. Talked about an escrow.
It says the
Do we want to do the escrow?
supervisor, we would let the
We'll recommend either. Leave it to the supervisors.
For final
supervisors.
approval.
Yeah.
For
Well,
final
can we just
approval.
say they should consider these two options? I would think they
They'll
would.
make the ultimate decision anyway.
Right, right.
Recommendation, I think it's fine.
I would think they would put it in only because showing at some later date and telling the homeowner, by the way, we're putting a
Yeah,
sidewalk
dig
in
up your
here,
yard.
is not going to make friends.
So they choose recommendation towards sidewalk.
Okay, so let me restate. I'll state the same thing for that. So a waiver of the sidewalk requirement along Road A and B, subject to the provision of the trenches along the roadways for stormwater management. Along Wayland Road, it is recommended that the supervisors consider either requiring a sidewalk along Wayland or gaining an escrow with funds necessary to put that sidewalk in at some later date at their discretion.
At 110% of the cost.
Go with
That's
that.
typical.
Yeah.
Weren't we going to say, but I'm sorry, I'm not using that. But we're leaning towards installing sidewalk.
We
Well,
can,
consideration from planning commission is to.
right. I'm fine. I mean, that's what, yeah. Though our preference would be to install the sidewalks today. That's fine.
Curb,
Working
number
on.
29.
Did I miss that?
That's right up.
Just want to confirm that you're saying that sidewalks and the curb along.
Right, yeah, I'm just
That's
turning
what
back, yeah.
we were just trying to make sure we got covered, yeah.
Yeah, an additional waiver, I'll just call it addition. An additional waiver has been requested to not provide curbing along roads A and B. We recommend granting this waiver request. And I have the final waiver request is for providing HDPE piping in lieu of concrete piping for the sewer lines. And we recommend approval of that waiver as well. Did I check all your boxes?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Anyone else comment?
Executed perfectly.
Do we have a second? Oh,
Just got one little.
oh, okay.
The last gentleman who spoke. Taken. Yeah. Right. What is this?
Right.
Arrange.
So, in addition, so,
It was subject to.
yeah,
I think this was
or it's going to redesign,
So subject to the resolution of the.
subject to the resolution of the additional easement required for the sanitary sewer
At the property
with the,
adjacent to,
is it labeled?
yeah, it
You know
was,
the address.
170. I think it's 170, right?
170.
Yeah, 170.
Hunt Valley
170,
Okay.
Hunt Valley Circle. Hunt Valley Lane, Hunt Valley Lane or Circle?
Circle.
Subject to, an adequate reconciliation of the required easement with property owner at 170 Hunt Valley Circle for the sanitary sewer.
Yeah. And that agreement is between what parties?
Those two.
Those two. How does that get executed? Have you guys spoken before?
Yeah, we were waiting to get through preliminary plan before we.
Yeah,
started.
okay, got it.
That's-
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Have a
I
second.
second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 I favor with the one proviso that I would more favor the escrow for the sidewalk on Wayland Road, since there's not a sidewalk on either side presently of the existing development. But otherwise, I certainly support it, and it's the Board of Supervisors who will make that final decision.
Did
Noted.
Paul?
You want to just say it?
What?
Do you have any preference? Do you have any preference?
I just want there to, my preference is I want there to be room for people to run up and down the road or walk up and down the road because it's dangerous now, so.
Will be less dangerous even if it's only part of the
Well,
road.
if you have 3
Right.
blocks.
So I mean, as long as there's space there
Well, let's just say, the planning commission,
pursuant to the whims of the,
Is it that- but at least for those 3 tracts of land, somebody would be off the road.
yeah,
It's not much, but it's 3 blocks of
something.
land.
345 feet
I'm with you.
or plus.
Plus.
It's plus the width of the lots. Yeah. I mean,
I'm good.
I think it's, I
That's
said,
fine. I mean, we
Yeah.
support it.
Okay.
The board will do what they want to do.
Yes,
yes. Okay,
you made it.
we made it. Thanks for coming.
Oh, I
thank you
didn't hear
very
the vote. I'm
much.
sorry.
Oh, well, everyone said aye. You said aye with a proviso.
Right.
Right.
5-0.
Motion carried. I don't have my mallet.
But
Thank you very much.
thank you for working through it
You
and
guys,
addressing
thank
the
you
issues.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Oh, now it's next.
Okay.
You need a building permit. You don't think so? Because what this is about is AJ needing a building.
So right now, there's nobody on.
What's next, boss?
So why do you have?
Next
rules
item.
taking them down when there's nothing on
I assume this is you, Rich, on the historic preservation.
I don't know how they're doing them, but
You see what I'm saying?
they have a whole part in here about creative. They created.
Like, you can't do that on somebody's property. Yeah.
And it was, wrong. But there was some additions that were needed. And there was a few things we wanted to look at. We had a working group where we brought in the Historical Society, we brought in a couple members of the Planning Commission. We didn't have any quorums or anything, but just for discussion of some of the issues that you had raised at the prior Planning Commission meeting when you considered it. I went back, had some further discussions just with Township Administration on how to tackle this, to just kind of reconfigure, keep the intent of what everybody wanted to do, and maybe postpone some of the more interesting discussion or more difficult discussion for future sessions or future ordinance. I think, as you know, there's some rewriting of the zoning ordinance as a whole going on. And so things such as changes of use or adding uses, and then the requirements for adding uses and changing uses. It's kind of tough to do that when you don't even know what the requirements are going to be for the rest of the district until that whole process is finalized. The condition, further, there was additional uses for historic resources that were proposed. The conditions that needed to be satisfied for the conditional uses were very vague, good for the community, not contrary to
Right, it's not
SAT
gonna help
welfare.
us make
There's not much you
decisions.
could do with that when
Right.
you actually go to apply a measuring stick to a particular use. So you really typically want very specific criteria that have to be met that the board would consider. So, parking requirements, setback requirements, lighting requirements, hours of operation, all these types of things that
Sorry, go ahead.
many things that weren't necessarily in that. So in talking to the administration, what we decided to do is that we said, look, let's break this into two big chunks. So the first chunk that we can deal with in one ordinance is let's just create the Historical Society, right? A commission. So we just have commission, right? That was in the other ordinance that you looked at. That's what we do here with Chapter 93. It's not a zoning issue. It's really not a planning commission issue so much as we're creating this, but it has this section that we do has overlap with the planning commission issue. So number one is not a zoning code. Chapter 93 itself is just this historic preservation chapter that will be added to the township code. And it has some definitions. It has some criteria as to, creating this historic resource inventory that we talked about. What's a historic resource inventory? It's a listing and an explanation of various resources in the community that are they going to be considered historic and have some sort of special protection. Okay. There was concerns from the Planning Commission before about, well, how does one get on or get off of this, and is there notice to anyone? And
It wasn't about notice. It was about overtaking property owner rights.
well, I mean, that's another issue. I mean, at some
You
level,
can't do that. Like in Lower Merion Township, you are given a choice. If you have a historic property, whether you want to become an official historic property or rescind your ability to claim history.
well, there's a hearing process.
No, that's not in fact true. I own a property that is considered historic in that community. We were given a choice. Then if you say yes, then you have to follow and comply. This is saying you have taken, from what I see, there's no change to the last one.
There's a lot
Where,
of change.
What?
There's a lot of change in this
No,
word.
no, 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 no.
Trust
Let me
me.
finish my sentence. There is a lot of change, but what I could not discern a change regarding was twofold. One is there doesn't seem to be a stopgap for the owner who previously has purchased and owned a property. And now the township's going to overlay and say, now we're going to tell you what your property is and what you can do with it. They had no knowledge that the township was going to overwrite their property before they purchased it or have forever owned it in their family. That just seems overtaking somebody's rights.
Okay.
And then it goes on to say, it gives this historic commission an opportunity to advise on what appropriate uses are. Well, what does that mean? What's an appropriate use? Can somebody now in a residential neighborhood construct a commercial entity?
No,
Okay, that's what, it's not clear here.
I think it's clear respectfully that that is not being done here.
Well, they don't say that. Okay, and then the third
So you
thing,
want me to write in the negative, every negative of what you can't do?
well, it doesn't
Typically, what
say.
it says, the uses that are already allowed in the underlying zoning district are the same
Okay, I
uses
may
that.
have
will-
missed that.
Okay.
Okay,
So to me, that is finite. And so that's specifically what we took out were all those other uses for multiple reasons. Number one, like I said, all those criteria about conditional use criteria. It's a very big discussion, frankly. And I think there's not that we're afraid of a big discussion, but I think there's an intent on having the historic commission established, having the inventory process started, and delaying any discussion as to whether there's going to be any additional uses, if there's going to be any additional uses. If there are, then there would have to be that other discussion about all those other criteria. That's not in here. This is tied to the zoning. If you're in a residential zoning district, you can use it as residential uses. Somebody wants to come in, and it's a historical resource on a property, and it's not the primary structure, right? I have a residential home. I have a barn out back. The barn is what's considered, it's not the primary. Typically, the primary structure is the historical resource, but it can be designated as that accessory structure as the primary, as the historical resource. Before they come in and could just convert that to something different, they have to come before the, and make major changes to that structure. They have to come before the historical commission, and they can help say, listen, you can preserve this better. There's ways for you to do what you want to do. There might be resources for what you want to do. It's almost like a cooling off period. And they advise them, hey, you can, maybe you could do this, maybe you could do that.
there
It's
was a
just,
lot of data that was, believe me, I like historic preservation, so
Mm-hmm.
it may sound that I'm opposed to it. But when I read this, there was a lot of burden put on the owner for something that they already own, that you have said,
There is.
you shall now comply to our wishes, when they never purchased the property with that understanding of that's how their property is going to be managed.
that's correct.
That-
And I'm not.
Wholeheartedly against overtaking a property owner's rights.
And you are absolutely entitled to have that position. This board is entirely entitled to have this position. The Board of Supervisors is entirely entitled to have that position, and I'm not taking a position on that. I was tasked to create a historic preservation ordinance consistent with what the Historical Society recommended and correct some infirmities that I detected.
Their
and some-
objective,
wait a minute, and some concerns that were addressed by this board. If you would like to take out, an encumbrance on the property, I think that's fine. I suggest to you that it guts it. I mean, what, maybe you can explain what you envision as to what the historical resources are and what's going to be imposed
sure.
on.
So what I would do is I certainly wouldn't start with 75 years. My house will very soon be 75 years. And is an ordinary house in Newtown Square. And as of today, the people who sit in this room, the people who made up these plans probably think my house is ordinary. But we all won't be here in 10 years, in 20 years. And I don't know what that future person is going to say about my house or any other house that is built in the 1950s. I think 75 years is a rather short time frame for somebody to start assessing their view of the historic nature of my house. And without my control, because it's been taken away from me, now saying, you are a historic house and here's what you shall do. I find that very disturbing. So what I would propose in answer to your question is a methodology where somebody does say, here are the criteria, as you say in this document, that we would consider something historic, maybe get a little bit more teeth around it, and then say, here's the process, like you have started to do, here's the process. But if somebody walks into a property buying it now and there's historic, says, hey, now change of ownership, this is now the condition. You're now walking that property, you need to know. You're walking into a property that's now going to be labeled historic. This is what you're going to be governed by. Are you sure you want to still buy it? But if you're telling me I own it, then I have to have a voice in whether I want to follow. And there's got to be some benefits to being historic. And then I say, yeah, I want to be historic. I love my property. I love being a historic property owner. Here are the benefits I'm going to get. That all is great. Or no, I don't want that encumbrance. I didn't buy my property. I didn't own my property intending to have that encumbrance. So I think that needs to, that's how the approach I would do. And is find an avenue where a pre-existing property owner has an ability to weigh in on the status. And there may be some benefit to that. I mean, I'm sure there's many different ways to find benefit to the owner where we all end up with the historic properties
You
preserved.
keep saying the opportunity of the owner to weigh in, right? There's a whole hearing process, right?
Yeah, but you're saying, no, they get the final to say. They get the final decision. They own the property.
Wait, can I just interject here? And you know that I had a lot of objection about it, and I thought that you did a great job of putting in that process, bringing in the Board of Supervisors to make the final determination, both with the appointment of the committee, and it always comes to them. They're the elected officials. They're the ones that should do it. The shortcoming that I see, and I think it would probably address, and it may not be a shortcoming, but section 95.5 discusses an historic resources inventory is hereby established. Where is that coming from?
Well, yes. So
Where's the starting point?
there's the good point. The starting point is now, first of all, has to be advertised properly as a zoning ordinance, okay? There has to be a hearing on this ordinance itself as a zoning ordinance.
93.5.
Because we incorporate, so put it this way. When you are doing a zoning map overlay, so this ordinance is an amendment to the code, okay? Various parts of the code, going from the new historical preservation chapter to our permits department. So it delays certain permits to have that clean off period, to our zoning code, right? So the zoning code, when you are added to the historical resource inventory, that says change to the zoning map. So anytime that property is added to this overlay, that's a zoning map amendment. So there's got to be notice and a zoning process that happens. The only properties that are automatically on the inventory per this code are the class 1 resources.
Last one?
Class 1, which have already been identified.
Designated by, there was like 6-10
Are
criteria.
those federal ones?
Yes.
Page 6.
Yes.
Okay, the federal.
And frankly, they're already subject in our zoning code to protection. You can't just take those down. So this is essentially, we're taking away that portion. We have a small historic preservation section currently in our zoning code for the class 1 historic resources in the township. So this just takes those, adds them to the historic inventory, right? The historic resource inventory. Every other resource from henceforth would have to go through a process, not only through the historical commission hearing process with a recommendation to the board, but then if the board wants to add it, they'd actually have to amend the zoning map. So, and now if in the future you would want to add those additional uses that you're talking about, that the carrot aspect of it, hey, you can use this house as a bed and breakfast or as a.
That's what I object to.
Well, but wait, let me just get to your point first,
Yeah.
because the last draft of this proposal contemplated that the Historic Commission would designate whatever buildings in the township they believe to be on this program.
And they had a list, and it was here it is, right?
Yeah, and that was
Yes.
that was ridiculous. But okay, and now you've changed it. You got the ins and the outs. But I would just want to make certain that the starting point is so that every existing homeowner in this municipality knows if they have one of those if they have the designations listed in class 1.
That's right.
I mean, that you have to.
Yeah, and I think there's only 5 or 6 of them.
I think there's,
But what about class?
So I think most of them are in township owned.
yeah, I mean, you know, you've got the octagonal school, you've got the paper mill house.
Right.
You've got the.
Red cover bridge.
What about the
Uh,
Evan
But there's
Lewis,
class
Evan
two.
Lewis house in Echo Valley?
I don't know.
But there's
That's
this class
clearly
2 list.
historical. It was the,
There is
that one is
But I
historical.
don't
It's got
think,
a
I
sign
don't
out.
think it's on the national register.
Okay, but
And
how
so
would that property
therefore-
be governed by
Well,
this?
there's ORs here. There's ORs in it. It's not just the national registry. That would be class 1. I
Right,
mean,
there's this whole, this next page is class 2. It says if you meet one of these 10 criteria, it's considered on the historical inventory.
What section are you looking at?
That's just
Page
following,
7.
just following, page 7. Says criteria for designation is class 2.
Right.
Class 1, you know, that seems really very clear. The owner would probably know those
Well,
things.
this doesn't say you're on the list. This is criteria for designation. These
Who
are,
decides?
where's the beginning list? That's the
Right.
key.
Where's
that's the
I-
class.
I-
only the
I
cla-
like
there
the
is
other
no-
process.
Other than the
Yeah.
federal, is there anything else on the list in this world?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the class 1 resource.
Who
What is-
has the final say in what goes on to the list after that?
Supervisor.
Which list?
After the initial.
Supervisors.
Supervisor.
That's my point. That's my concern. The property owner doesn't control his or her own
He
property.
does have the right to, if the historic commission that's appointed by the Board of Supervisors recommends a property to be on the historic list,
Mhm.
the owner can oppose it before a public hearing before the historic commission. If the historic commission overrules the homeowner, which I would find astounding, then it goes to the Board of Supervisors as an ordinance change. And the only caveat that I have after that is that the ordinance change, the homeowner would have to get notice of the proposed ordinance change under the rules.
And the
right?
neighbors.
And the neighbors.
It's
right?
got to
There's
be
a
posted. They got to
notification.
get, you got to publish it in the newspaper.
Right.
You have to send written,
But
you have
they
to
don't
send,
vote.
And
you
then,
have to send
then
written
the
notice.
ordinance, oh yeah, they have to vote. The
The
ordinance has to be adopted.
Supervisor votes.
Yes.
Supervisors.
Right, it says
Right.
all in the
None
hands
of
of
the
the
neighbors or
supervisors.
anybody.
Well,
The
the
neighbors
supervisor-
don't get
but
to
the-
vote.
But the neighbor gets, I mean, the property owner certainly is going to be speaking. Do you think if the
Correct.
Board of Supervisor, if the property owner comes and says, I don't want this, despite the historic commission does, and then you think the Board of Supervisors would approve it?
Yes,
Doubtful. But if they do,
because you're
then
not dealing necessarily
if
with
they
this
do-
supervisor board, you're dealing with maybe 2 iterations down the road.
If
Who
they-
knows who they are?
yeah, but if they do, then that homeowner, under this unbelievable circumstance that I doubt would ever happen, would have a right to appeal to the Court of Common Pleas and have judicial review of that ordinance.
What a ridiculous process to take. a
Well, look,
homeowner.
as long as we're not creating, and this was the big problem before, we had a non-elected body designating properties of existing homeowners that could be historical and subject to restrictions. I agree with you, the restrictions. I'm not the strongest in favor of historical designations. The historical designations are hard. And I think that's because you see so few, that's why they are hard. But I think the process, the due process that's been created in this ordinance is fine, as long as the beginning list is not taking over any properties. that
But
aren't.
you're saying, you're.
Let me
you're
give it for
presupposing-
example. So the Evan Lewis house, it was, I think it was 1683, right in Echo Valley. Right, you know the house? Does anybody, you're right. If that's not on the list, I think it's probably a bullseye one for it. Let's say
Yeah.
Dave Dugery, a friend of mine, comes in and says,
Mhm.
I want to wipe the house out and I want to build a new house.
Mhm.
Is that his right to do that?
If it's a class 1 resource,
But it's not on the list right now.
if it's a class 1 resource, it's automatically on the list. Okay?
I understand that.
Yes.
It's got a sign out. It's,
Look at the class, I mean, you know,
I'm just saying, it was built in 1683.
Well,
That
there's
house
quite-
would have a bullseye on its back to be one of these properties.
one of class 1 or class 2.
I haven't seen, I haven't seen the list. My point is, he says, he brings in a permit and says to the township, I want to wipe my house out and build a new house
Right.
on the property. It's 3
If
acres.
he's a class 1
right there.
resource, class 1, if he's if he's already a class one resource, no, he can't do that. He can't do that under the current code.
Because he bought it when it was a class
No,
one. I
because,
get that.
no, because it's on the class one.
Right, it's the federal
resource
list.
But he bought
It's
it,
not
but he
just the
bought
federal
it
list.
when it
Yeah.
was on that list, so he knew that it had those restrictions.
Well, maybe. I don't know that for an answer.
Yeah.
It could have been put on the list afterwards.
Well, he should have been given due notice, and if we're redoing this historical thing right now, if he owns a property that wasn't on the list, he should have been given notice like, hey, by the way, you can't do this, that, and the other if this goes through. You know,
We're not adding it to the list.
I understand, I agree with you, and so that's why I was saying, if it's not, let's assume it's not on the list. And he comes in and says he wants to knock it down and build his own house. But the township says, historical society, no way, we can't do that. This is in the 1683, no way, we're gonna recommend this goes on the list.
Right.
And they make a recommendation and vote, send it to the Board of Supervisors, and the Board of Supervisors says, how many are on the Board of Supervisors? How many people?
Five folks.
5. Let's say 3 say, yeah, we think it should go on the list.
You don't just think it. There's an objective criteria to put it on the class one list.
I understand, and let's say.
Or
No, we're
class
talking
two
about
list.
class 2 lists.
Or
Yeah, the
class
class
That's a different
two.
issue. I'm trying to say,
I
there's
know.
two different, that we set it up for two different ways,
Right, so
right?
he's
Class
talking
one
about
and
a
class
class
two.
2 situation.
He is. I didn't hear that. That's what I'm asking.
So I'm saying, so if 3 of the supervisors say, yeah, it's now on the list.
Okay.
He's like, what? I didn't buy it with it on the list,
I don't know
and now
that,
it's being taken away from me.
I don't know that the timing would work that such that if he has a permit in to do something with the house, that they could suddenly add it to deny him his permit rights. I mean, the timing just doesn't work out that way.
I'm just saying, like, in that situation, I'd be really uncomfortable with that. I would be uncomfortable. I bought the house, and now after I bought the house, it goes on this list.
Okay. And
And
what's
you can't-
what are the
you're taking
criteria?
over-
What is it about? Listen,
I'm
I'm not
listening.
advocating this, right? I was asked
know
to
you're
write the
not.
damn thing.
I thought you did a good
What I-
job of creating the
I think he
process.
did a fantastic job. I'm just
Also,
pointing out
so
something.
what I'm asking is, right, you want to make recommendations. I'm happy to incorporate those
Agree,
recommendations.
fair.
I need to know what the recommendations are. I understand what Claire's saying. She wants to be voluntary. I got it. I'm not going to make that change without a whole body telling me that this has to be voluntary. I submit to you that just because Lower Merion allowed you to do it voluntarily, I don't think it is voluntary. My office represents Lower Merion Township.
Well, maybe they've changed their laws.
It played a fairly big role in what we have here. It's not verbatim, it's scaled down, but
They
you know,
may
I
have
didn't-
changed their
I
laws since
never-
the time that was.
I just submit to you, you should take a look at Lower Merion's and maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I'm happy to discuss with you anytime you want. Take a look. But I believe it's not totally voluntary. I think it's the homeowner has a chance to weigh in. Now, what the class one is, you're not knocking this down unless the court overrules us, essentially, all right? Or modifying it so substantially that it's just like knocking it down. Class two is different. All really that I have here is, for the class two is, it's a cooling off period, right? Where, hey, come in, talk to the historical, once it's on the list, now you got to come in and talk to the historical commission, say, okay, my thing's on the list here. I want to make changes. It's a cooling off period. That's really all it is. Come in, talk to us, let us talk to you about ways, hey, you have a great property here, all right? Why do you want to just knock it down without considering ways in which you could do it? Maybe there's information that they could give them. Maybe there's what?
That's not where my concern is. My concern is, how does something get on class 2 list?
A hearing process. I told you that. So.
No, and I'm saying that's what I'm saying I have difficulty with.
Right, so I'm looking.
No, I get it, but I'm asking Paul's question now. You're saying, can the guy come in who's on the class 2 list, right?
Yeah.
And say, what can he do and what can he do? He's
Yeah.
delayed in the process, so he has to get bombarded with information from the Historical Society. Now, I do think at the very end, after all of this, the way it's written is that the board ultimately has the right to deny the destruction of the historic resource on class 2. That's the ultimate tamale here. There's two different criteria essentially. For the class 1, it's much harder to do it, right? It's like a variance type standard. For a class 2, it's a little bit less of a burden. We can remove that burden if you'd like. And simply say, you got to come in for the cooling off period. And, you got to come, you got to listen to the folks who love history. You got to hear about resources that might be available to you to help you preserve this. You have to listen to folks who have information for you about what you can do to do what you want to do and preserve this asset, how important it is of a loss to the community. And if you still want to do it, which is essentially the way it's written, except for,
Like I say, the board can approve it. I mean, I think Kurt's point was if 3 of 2, like if the way phase class 2 is, it
Yeah.
says that if the historical society that's appointed by the board believes that a property, which one? A property embodies an icon associated with an era characterized by distinctive architectural style, that property can be that property by the historical commission could be designated as into the system, historical, okay?
well, I
Now,
mean,
the
by
property
the board of supervisors.
Well, the property owner, well, first it goes before the public hearings before the historical society.
Yes,
Then the historical society prepares a report that comes before the board of supervisors, and the board of supervisors has to adopt an ordinance to effectively approve that.
Execute.
Okay, so if there's going to be an adoption of an ordinance,
Which
The
again is
property
the
owner-
second hearing.
which is.
right, which is effectively a second hearing, and the property owner would have to get notice of that. It
Yes.
doesn't say that in here, it just says adopted by an ordinance, so yet you know that in an ordinance that a property owner is going to get notice of it because a property right is being affected.
Correct.
Now,
And it's a
First
zoning
situation.
ordinance. It's increased notice beyond just regular
right,
ordinance.
right. Well, we care about the property owner. We
Right.
don't care about the neighbor worrying about what happens to the property owner. This is a guy that bought a house and now all of a sudden historical society is saying,
Yeah.
I like the molding up there. I
Right.
think it's.
I guess
historic."
Paul, it's a very good point, except.
Yeah.
In the future, right, this is
Yeah.
buildable, right? If there's going to be, which originally existed in our historical society's vision of what this would be, there were additional uses that were allowed once you had that historical designation, okay? I mean, like there was bed and breakfast, there was museum, there was different types of things that in a residential neighborhood, you normally wouldn't be able to do that. I do not include that in here. However, it's buildable such that if we ever did add that, that zoning notice becomes more important because the historical society, I'm sorry, the historical resource next to my house could suddenly be a commercial operation.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that we are set up, if we ever do additional uses, that process is there.
I'm most concerned with restricting a property owner's use of his property.
Correct.
And I don't want other people saying what a property owner can do with his or her property if that property owner doesn't want to do it. And that's Claire's point.
Yeah.
Claire's
Yeah.
point is the property owner should have the last say. Okay?
You don't actually own the property if you don't.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Well,
I
I-
think, which is.
Well,
if you- if you-
that's not exactly right, but I understand what you're saying.
Very, okay.
Let me say, so I'm looking at this and it says at the top, historic,
Okay,
top of page 7, a building structure or site may be placed in the inventory if it meets one or more of the following criteria.
Yeah.
One could be design, it could be detail, I guess that could be gingerbread on, materials, might the materials be behind the walls, such as structural beams that are wood, craftsmanship, only need one of those.
Where are you looking?
Number
So
6,
top of
under
7.
letter B,
Right.
contains elements of design, detail, materials, or craftsmanship. Any one of those,
Right.
or if you want to lump it, the Oxford comma, materials and craftsmanship together. Anyways, any one of those puts you in a role of being the bad guy who's got to defend your property rights.
Well, no, only if your property is only 75 years old.
You're 76 years old.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And
but my
they-
house is
they like your
already yellow,
gingerbread.
what's that?
well, take it out.
Mhm.
Breck, take out that piece. I mean, I'll tell you, this is pretty,
Right.
yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't like that one, take it out. What I'm concerned that you're missing, and I'm not
That
saying
there's
it's
more
right or
process.
wrong, but what I'm concerned that you're missing is you're conflating being put on the list and then what the impact of being put on the list is. There's two separate issues,
There's two
right?
separate issues.
Yes, and there's two separate processes. Once you're on the list, there's a process on what can you do with the property after you're on it. I feel that,
So-
that the question, from the questions that are being answered,
I'm not
then we're
conflating them.
conflating the, as a board, as a whole, we're conflating the two issues, okay? Paul's asking questions geared towards what can I do with my property? You're asking questions, how do I get on or off the property? And who's making that decision?
So, and I would think that we can't put the cart before the horse, that we have to, you're saying build later, what can happen to the property? You can't say, here are all the properties. Now, it's sort of like a Nancy Pelosi thing. Now we're gonna tell you what you can do with the properties. We have to figure out what do we want to do with historical properties, then we can say,
No.
who wants to be on them?
No,
Yes.
that's
unfair then to say, do you want to be part of the historical? Oh, yeah, I'd like to, that sounds really romantic. That's great. I'll be on the human. Okay, here comes 2 years later. Here's what you can do or not do with your property. That just
that makes
seems
no
unfair.
sense. It would only add, it only adds, right? I mean, the ordinance says right here, right? What are the permitted uses? We limited to currently.
Oh, what, I thought you said that was gonna come later.
Permitted uses, the following uses and no others, the following uses and no others shall be
Where are you,
permitted
where are you, where are
on
you?
properties within the historic resource overlay district. Page 14, 172-100.4. A, any use permitted in the underlying zoning district in which the property is located. Right? So nobody's talking.
I thought you said earlier that what was gonna come later. Just,
I said, if the board decides, if you decide you want to make what was in the proposed ordinance from the historical commission
Yeah.
had multiple additional uses on
Correct.
top of, okay?
Yes.
But then it
You like
also regulated what you could use it for
Correct.
what already you could use it for,
Yes.
okay? We took that out
yes.
and we said, no, it's going to stay the same uses. That's what's in your current zoning district. What I said is, if you decide at a future date that you want to allow additional uses, that would not hurt the property owner in any way because the property owner doesn't have to take advantage of additional uses. If they choose to do additional uses, it would be added, if you choose to allow additional uses for historical properties, it would be added under 172-100.4, subject to a conditional use application. And then you would have to create an entire list of additional criteria, not for using it as consistent with your current zoning district, but if you want to use it for something else. I live in a residential district. I'm not allowed to have a bed and breakfast. If you decide that if I have a historical property, I can use it as a bed and breakfast, I would have to come in to the board of
As
supervisors
an individual person.
as an individual person, a right that I don't have now because I can only use it as a residential district. And to take advantage of that additional right that you may give me in the future, have to go through a series of
Right.
criteria. Hey, I have to have parking for 6 cars. You know, I have to have sufficient lighting. I can't operate within these hours, whatever those are. That's what I took out of here because
Right.
what was in there, I felt was restricting people on their uses, which we didn't want to do. I perceived that the township didn't want to do, restrict anybody for the use of their current property. This doesn't do that. If you have an existing use, you could still use it for the existing use. If I have a house, I could still use it as a house. If it's a commercial district, I have a shop, I can still use it as a shop. That's not what this does. This doesn't take that away. What we're saying is if you want to knock down or substantially knock down or substantially alter the appearance such that you're essentially knocking down the historic value, you got to come in before the historical commission, have a hearing and allow them to tell you all these different issues of, this is what we could do. Please don't knock this down. We don't want you to knock this down. Now, there is at the very end, and this is where you could just recommend to take this out. At the end of that process, there's delay of demolition. Let's go here, hold on. Immediate removal, conditional approval, delay of demolition, right? So there's these, it's cooling off period essentially. We're not letting you just knock this down without talking to us. Doesn't mean you can't knock it down ever. It means you can't just do it. Historical, class 1, it's much harder to be able to knock it down or do anything with, much harder to do it. But for everybody else, there's this process. Delay of demolition. The class 2 resources, we're on page 12. provide its recommendation on issuance of the permit to the board not later than 100 days. So it's pretty substantial cooling off period, right? It's months. It's not, you can't just come in and say, I want a demolition permit. You're stretching this process out. They make a recommendation regarding all these factors, right? I'm under paragraph 3. Effective
Yeah.
demolition on the significant, they're
I
going to do
would say
this.
some of this, I'm sorry, hey, I think some of this, I think you should take a yellow highlighter too. Like there's stuff here, like they're asking for information that,
Let me back up a second, and I may sound ignorant. What are we trying to accomplish tonight with this document?
The purpose of
And
the, let me
how do
just-
we proceed?
let me finish what I was saying and then we'll get
Yes.
there. All right, so if you go down to page 13, right? Approval, look at letter B on page 13 at the top of the page. This is the end of the delay period. After the historical commission has beaten you up about what you want to do with your property, and after they made their recommendation to the Board of Supervisors about what you want to do to your property, there's this B. And I think that, Paul, this is what you were worried about.
Yeah.
We're not talking about class 1, talking about class 2.
the class 2A, what point are you on then?
B, page 13.
That's
Page
class-
13.
That's
That's class 1.
Says class 1, this one I'm looking at. Top of the page. top
Oh, I'm
third.
sorry. Yep, that is class 1. Hold on.
We have to keep going.
Hold on.
And this says that if they say don't demolish after all those hearings and you do, you've got to restore
Hold
it.
on.
And then they want to
Yeah,
know
there
here,
is.
who did you buy it from? Was it familiar? Was it business? Date? Why does that matter as to whether
Building
it's
historical
permits
in class 2
But that's-
resource,
That's an
Yeah, hold on.
intrusion.
Yes, that's what it is. but-
page 9.
Come out.
Why is that make it historical? Whether you
Yeah.
bought it from business or family, when you bought it, how
Might
what-
extend.
what
The
has
Hold
that
on,
to
hold
do
on.
with
Shall approve the application for demolition
Yep.
of the resource in accordance with section 2G1. Right at the top of page 12, the application 105 days review period.
Yep, hold on.
Right.
Whether it receives recommendation from the
Yeah, 'cause I-
historic commission or
There's stuff in here that
That's
just
right,
says
you have to pay
all.
fair compensation for the property.
right at the top of
Yeah,
page.
no tax, maybe I read
No,
it
I
differently.
think.
Yes.
It's very demanding.
That- there it is.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
They may
But
request
this provides for
our
a
expiration.
Yeah, but there's a,
hearing process.
the same as a class 2, except
Application requires not to get any.
Page 9 has the demolition of a class 2
Right.
resource.
No.
So what I took out for class 2, this is what I did. For class 2,
9.
there's no, in the end, right, for the way this is set up, for class
For
1,
demolition of a building.
it could block demolition with a substantial alteration. Class 2, they can't. That's essentially what,
They can't block demolition.
that's,
If the person wanted to, but what if they wanted to say, hey, I don't want you to take that, whatever, I don't know, the architectural top of your roof off.
the way we have this set up is after the end of that period, they can do it in a class 2.
Even though the Board of Supervisors has approved it, they can still ignore what the ordinance adoption is?
Now, say it again now?
Even if the Board of Supervisors approves, you got your 3-2 vote.
Yep.
The Historical Society sends their report in saying, we think that this class 2 property should be a historic, onto the historical list.
Yes.
Yeah.
We think we should prevent them from, now they have to comply with whatever the recommendations are by the historical commission.
Right.
And then the Lord knows what the.
Well, no, but what, again, don't conflate the two of getting on the list and then how you're treated once you're on the list.
Well, I don't care about once you're
So
on
you
the
get
list.
on the
I
list.
don't care being on the list. I care about, like, right now, there's
the
only 5
applicant?
properties on the list, is
Right.
what you're saying to me.
Class 1 properties.
What about class 2 properties?
There's no class 2 properties on the
Okay,
list.
so
You have
the
to be
only
put on the
way,
list.
the only way a property can get onto the list
Yes,
is the Historical Society, the 5 members appointed by the Board of Supervisors,
yes.
comes up and says, we think this property should be on the list.
Or the homeowner asks, or,
Right. Well, we don't have to worry about if the homeowner asks.
If the homeowner asks, who cares? Let
Yeah,
him.
right. I mean, that's,
well, you might not want to do
Well,
it because,
I get you there.
Because you might be adding additional uses here. I mean,
Fair enough,
Right,
fair enough,
right.
I'm
but
not worried about the homeowner
Right.
requesting. I'm worried about the homeowner not requesting.
Right.
The homeowner being forced into this.
Right, there's about
circumstance.
70 properties that the Historical Society, right, some of which will become the Historical Commission most likely, want on that list and proposed us putting on that list right away. Right, so yes, there's a number of properties out there that have been.
so the Board of
identified.
Supervisors appointed these people.
Nobody's been appointed yet.
Not yet. They
I
will.
know, not yet, but they
That's the
will.
purpose
Yes.
of this.
They will appoint them.
Yes, that's
Hey,
that's
you,
the
I'm gonna
that's the
appoint
first
you.
chapter.
That's the purpose of
That's the
this.
first chapter.
Correct.
This
And they'll
allows
have to
them
be residents of the township.
Residents of the township, they get appointed by the Board of Supervisors.
Yes,
They then say, hey, that house over there, we want it on the list.
yes.
They tell the Board of Supervisors.
Well, not exactly.
They
What?
likely have.
They
a
provide
list
a
hearing.
already.
They have a
They
list.
already
have a list
They have a list.
already.
Wait. So Paul says, yep, they pull out the list and they
Oh,
say,
Well, once you form the commission, the.
So regardless, so
historical
they-
commission, the People on it. can
There's folks who,
recommend-
yes, there's folks
Can
who,
recommend,
Yes.
and some of them probably already have an idea of what those.
there is a
historical
list that has been
properties
circulated already.
are. And
The
so
first
they
draft of
would-
this, they wanted us to put
They
it.
would present that if they all agree
Yes.
to the Board of Supervisors to say yes or no, these.
But they're gonna have to
are
have
the
hearings on
ones.
each one of those. That would be a hell of a hearing if they did all
I-
75.
no.
Understood,
And the board's not gonna do that.
understood.
not this board.
Not this board,
But not even,
agreed.
here's what I will tell you.
That's my issue.
Here's what I will tell you. There's not a board out there that would try to do 75 in one night.
I agree. Let's just break it down to one property, one property. So
What- Tell
one
me,
property.
in the end, what is it that you're worried about?
Well, here's what I'm worried
I don't
about.
understand.
So-
I'm on the
so-
list,
So the
right?
historical appointed board says, we want to put this property on. That property
Yes.
makes its way through the system.
It's on the list.
Makes its way through the system and the Board of Supervisors, and it goes up to the Board of Supervisors. And they say, yeah, it's on the list.
It's on the list. So what are you worried about? Tell me what you're worried about. It's on the
I'm
list.
worried that now rights have just been taken away.
What rights have been taken away?
They can't wipe the house out,
Is that your concern?
How about they can't paint the house a certain color?
or they can't,
It
they,
doesn't say that though.
Well, but it depends on what the restrictions are.
Yeah.
They can make whatever restrictions they want.
Well, no. It
Well,
would
how's
have
it
to,
ever gonna be
No.
qualified
No.
as a historical property if it's not some icon of whatever the heck it said there?
no. Look, it would have, what you're saying would have to be put into an ordinance.
Correct. You'd have to create the
Right.
restriction.
Right. Well, I
Okay,
can
so
do that now. I mean,
Now we have
this-
this ornamental architectural, there's a star bolt in it. They don't want, they want the star bolt to remain.
Right.
It's the only thing I know.
Yeah, I understand.
And so now that person can't change the front facade of his house
But it
because he
doesn't-
has to maintain the star bolt because he's.
But it
on the
doesn't say
system.
that.
But it says that it could be imposed if he gets put onto the system.
No, it doesn't. All it says is they got to come and have this cooling off period in this informational session and the waiting period. That's all it says.
Okay. I think.
I
that
mean,
we
wait,
should-
it sounds to me like what you're worried about is an ordinance that might be passed in the future to further restrict somebody. But that's a different fight. That's not what
I
this
have
does.
I'm conflating them. I have two different issues,
Yeah,
which now you've heard. So it's sort of like, barking up the same tree. One issue is the process and means and final say of who is on the list.
right.
That's just one.
Board of Supervisor here. Right, go ahead.
Then, separate from that, I have concerns. There's a lot of information demanded and requested of class 2 in order to do something that's really irrelevant to making decisions about historical buildings. So I don't understand why that's in here.
Where are you talking?
Okay, so let's go, for example, to page. Okay, it begins, class 2 begins on page 9 with point number 2, procedure for obtaining a building permit.
Mhm.
And if you read through all the procedures, there's a tremendous amount of information that is required and requested, and they can demand the applicant to provide it. And there is information that makes no sense to me why it's needed. Was it?
Well, what
just-
information? And we could talk about that and we can,
Well, that's what I was saying earlier.
Yes.
Why don't we have some time just to go through and highlight things that seem
Yeah.
odd?
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's the whole idea here. The whole idea is there's two lists. Why is there not two lists? There's two categories on the list. Because the class 1 category has a significant ability that takes away. Class 2 is different. the process is the same. The end result is different because you're not taking away as many rights.
So just real quick, I'm taking your list and I'm looking at B, right? Is that where you start? At the bottom of page 9?
Yeah.
Okay, so name and address, property owner of record, we require that today.
No, Steve, it's not there. It's not there. Keep going down.
Well, I'm gonna just, if I
You just want to
can,
go through the
we
list?
require a site plan showing the buildings. That we require today. Recent photograph of the resource proposed for demolition, that we don't require. Okay, that's the first thing that we don't require.
But that seems pretty
Reasonable.
reasonable.
Reason for demolition, I don't think we require it. If you come in and say you want a demolition on your house, we don't say, why are you doing it? This here requires a reason. I don't think that's onerous. The proposed method of demolition, we do require. We want to know how it's taken down so it's done safely. Intended future use, if there is something there, we want to know that. I mean, typically as we're doing this, we want to know because how you do the demolition then matters at the
understand.
end if you're coming back with something else.
I understand. That's not where my problems are.
Okay,
Yeah.
then where are the problems? I'm just going through the order. Those were the things that were required.
So why is there a list to begin with? Maybe I'm dumb, okay? Why go on the list? Why does somebody want a property on the list?
Listen. You don't have to have a historical preservation ordinance, period,
Okay,
right? You just don't have to have one. There's no
I'm
requirement.
with you. Let's address that one though.
Right.
Why is there an intent to put properties on a list?
Because many, many people in our Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania, in the municipality's planning code, and concerned citizens, lovers of history,
Yeah.
people who walk through neighborhoods and like, history is important, okay?
Yep.
It's in every one of those provisions that I just talked about legally, and then just concerned folks. We have a historical society for that very reason, right? Preservation, education, and bringing history to us, right? Making it something that's, you got volunteers that go to the Square Tavern
I'm with
on the
you.
weekends.
Why
We have
put them on the list?
to preserve history.
So by doing that, by putting them on the list, something is being restricted.
Yes.
Is demolition the
It's a
only
taking in
thing
some
that's-
It's a taking.
So let me just say, if I can, for just a moment. We passed a tree ordinance 6 months ago. And we basically in that tree ordinance says, if you have a tree that's on your property that is 36 inches, I believe is the diameter. If you cut that down, you have to go through a process. We did a taking because we said it was in the best interest of the community for us to preserve historic trees. We said that was important. Now, there's all kinds of reasons to do that. Okay? That's what, I mean, to be honest with you, if you look at almost everything that's in our ordinances, we tell you where you can put a shed and what size that shed is.
I can make you put a sidewalk in front of your house, even if you don't want it, and I can make you maintain that sidewalk, sweep that sidewalk, make sure it's safe for pedestrians, make sure the snow's gone. If you don't want to do it,
Those
you
are
have to do it.
additive things. We're talking about something somebody already owns.
Yeah, they do own the property. I'm
You
making them
own the
put it,
property.
you own the property. I'm making you put the sidewalk on that
In the
property.
right of way,
Yes,
in the right of
And I'm
way,
making you maintain it.
in the right of way.
yeah.
But it becomes part of your responsibility that you don't have today.
Okay,
When
look,
we
we're
took-
talking
I bought
about
it with
shoveling
a-
a sidewalk versus a building on your property. I mean.
I'm sure we can
let's-
rationalize and come up with
You
analogies.
just asked me why
to-
people want to preserve history. I gave you the answer
No,
why
and I'm
people want
with
to
you,
preserve
and
it.
that is a good reason to preserve it.
Yes,
My point is, the reason that there's a list
yes,
and to put a property on the
is
list,
to identify
Is
those
to-
properties and target them for preservation, right?
it's more than identifying the property.
And target it for preservation.
Targeted for preservation. I'm not sure of what target for preservation means.
It means identify it and
Exactly.
say, we want to preserve that property.
By saying I want to preserve that property, does it change the rights?
Yes,
Oh.
it changes the rights because it delays their ability to do something.
So I bought a property.
If it's
and
class
then it
two, if
gets
it's class
changed.
one, yes.
I understand. So I bought a property.
Yeah.
Then it gets changed. if I want to buy a property in Newtown Square and I understand the tree ordinance and that's on the books, and I understand the sidewalk ordinance that's on the books, I brought that property with knowledge that I know.
But I would say you bought.
change
your
that all the
property-
time.
You bought your property and the tree ordinance didn't exist. We put the tree ordinance in. We had a hearing. People had an opportunity to come in and speak to it. I don't know that very many people did, but people had this, and it was passed.
If you don't.
It is now a restriction that's upon you.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. We turn around and you move into your property and the speed limit in front of your house is 35. And the township changes it to 25. I already know this because I've had people tell me. Why
It's
did
a
you
fair
change-
argument.
Well, you changed it. I bought it with 35, wanted it to be.
I'm with you. That's a
If you're
fair
asking, is
argument.
it, if you're
That's a
asking,
fair
is it,
argument. I understand that.
if you're asking, is it legal to do this?
But that's.
Yes, it's legal.
But
If you're
that's-
asking if, my philosophy is whether you should or should not be able to do it, personally, I ain't giving you my answer because it doesn't, ain't up to me. I give you the legal opinion. It's up to you guys to say, we don't want to do this. We're recommending the board reject this ordinance or take some of it. We want a historical society. And we want them to talk about history. We don't even have the authority to do anything on anybody's private property except for class 1 resources. Make that recommendation. If you like the idea
Right,
of
right.
having some restriction and some cooling off period, like many townships do in the area, because we live in a historic area, to force people to become educated on things that they have, or if money becomes available for distribution, hey, don't knock this down. We could give you a grant if you don't knock down this barn, because you have to come before us and learn about that.
Now you're
process.
talking my language.
That's all this is. It doesn't
Well,
do
now
anything
you're
different.
talking my language.
Does this ordinance allow for the historical commission to independently designate a property as historical in class 2?
No.
No, it has to go to the board of supervisors. They then do.
Yeah, okay, but they start the process?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can they designate a property in class 2?
Oh, you mean, yes, they can identify a property, say, we believe this should be a class 2 property.
But there's
We
a
believe, but who
recommendation.
votes on it is.
Well, the board of supervisors would vote on it,
It's a
Yeah.
but you,
recommendation.
I don't think it does this. I think it says that, it talks about what the duties are, what they can do.
Yes.
Duties of Historical Commission, 93-4, beginning on page 4.
Mhm.
It says in paragraph E, aiding, assisting, promoting, and performing the nomination of historical resources in Newtown Township to the National Register of Historical Places. That's a class 1.
Yes, but that's
Class 1.
no, but all is they're doing.
Nowhere else here does it say that they can perform or nominate a property in class 2. Nowhere else in these categories. Unless I'm missing it.
Yeah,
There's a
take a look at
procedure.
93-4, duties of historical commission.
That's where I am. Look at every single paragraph and tell me if the historical commission can designate a class 2 property. They can initiate on their own as opposed to the property owner.
Yeah.
Initiate a class 2
Yeah,
historical
I
designation.
think it's A, I
It
think.
says offer recommendations, letter F, the second clause.
Yes, for
It does.
For
demolition.
demolition.
Okay, never mind, sorry.
For designation or removal. It's for designation or removal that they can recommend to the Board of Supervisors that this be put on the historic list.
Yeah,
They're
that's
not.
right.
I don't think the historical commission under this ordinance as drafted has the right to initiate a class 2 designation historical.
They can make a recommendation.
No, they can't.
Well,
There's
oh,
nowhere
says
here.
The procedure
Where are
for
you reading? Which
I
designation,
don't understand.
It's every single one.
page 8F.
Okay.
A property may be proposed for designation
For demolition.
or designation on, removal from, or change in classification
Under
on the
F.
historic resource inventory by the historic commission may be proposed. The Board of Supervisors or by the Board of Supervisors or the property owner, and any such
Procedure, F.
proposal shall first
What
be referred to the
F,
historic
procedure for
commission.
designation.
Page 8.
Page 8F.
F, top of the page.
So it's saying who can propose, and then there's a hearing.
Well, that's inconsistent. That's inconsistent with 93-4.
And the way I read this, the way this ordinance is, this is being written is to prevent demolition of something that's designated as a historic resource. I did not see anything else besides demolition that is precluded. Is that correct?
That's really right. Demolition is defined though. I mean, it's a little broader than
Yes,
just
yes.
knocking it down, but yes.
But-
And it's not for, and again, for class 1, it's
Right.
It's essentially a prohibition. Class 2, it's really not a prohibition, it's a delay, right?
Right,
Well,
but
but no, so just walk me through, I think this is.
That's really what
Just,
And
Paul, I
on
want to know
page-
where it's inconsistent.
On page 13, I think it's there, Paul. that they
But there's
can-
no, the authority of the board, the authority of the commission has to be set out in 93-4. If it does not have the authorization to act in
So you're saying
93-4.
add that into one.
Well, I'm saying keep it out.
Keep it out.
Yeah, I don't think that the board, the commission should have the authority to change a property owner's right
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
but they don't.
under a class 2. Well,
They
you
don't,
just
the way I
read under
read it.
paragraph.
No, they can recommend. They
Well, no,
can
no, I don't want to have any
propose.
process whatsoever.
They can
Well,
propose for
here's what it
designation.
says, yeah, right.
Then it has to go to a hearing.
Right.
I don't want them even to be able to do it.
Okay. I hear
So, I mean,
you.
we'll just make- yeah.
Can you clarify this? Because now I'm not sure if it pertains only to class 1 or class 2 or both. I don't know. Is on page 13. There's
Right.
section 3.
Yes,
So I think this is any historic building, class 1 or 2, but let's suspend that because I think that's what it's saying. So the concern here for me is in the class 2 arena. I think class 1 is a category by
what's the
itself.
concern, what's the
Right.
concern?
So the concern
Which
is
section under
what's going
section?
to precede this. So it says if you have demolished a building
Yes,
when they told you not to,
yes,
you've got to restore it.
yes,
So class 1, I think is a little easier for me to get my head around. It's on
Right.
federal registers, that sort of thing. But
and
class-
and that's the one where we actually prevent you from
Yeah,
demolishing.
okay.
it.
So let's take class 1 off the discussion, right?
Yes.
Because that's, I think we're all on the same page there.
Right.
But so now, here's where I have concern is class 2.
Where it's essentially a cooling off period.
But then there is a really cooling off period because here it's saying the theoretical possibility,
Right,
what this allows for, not that it would happen, but it allows for, is after the cooling off period, the board of directors still says, we don't want you to demolish it. This
no,
allows for
no,
that.
well, you can only do that if you amend the ordinance to say that. Right, if class 2 is simply a cooling off period with all these other, you still got to come in, you got to do all the requirements before you can knock it down. You have to listen to what is available, what you can, what resources might be available, ways you can modify your procedures to preserve this resource. In the end, if it's class 2, they can do whatever they want in the end, but they got to go through the hoops first.
But this
Okay.
just doesn't only apply to demolition.
Right,
I'm worried about a property owner
Yeah.
having his or her property designated as on the historic list, period.
Right, but what's the impact
The
of that?
the
Why are you
class
worried
2
about it?
historic list.
Yeah,
Class
and-
1,
Okay, so let's start, all right. Class
Class
1, yeah.
2.
So class 2, why are you worried about that designation?
because I think that it's too, like, the class 2 is so broad and you know, it's subjective opinion, not even reasonable opinion. It's subjective opinion of 5 persons that should be historic.
Okay,
And if that property owner, that individual who bought that property is now being imposed with a restrictive right, and with all
What's the
due respect,
restriction
Steve,
that
I
you're
think
worried
it's
about?
far different than cutting down a tree.
what's the restriction that you're worried about?
Whatever, well, what if the restrictions are in the designation of what constitutes a class 2 property?
No, that's the designation. What's after it's done, that's what I keep saying. Let's separate the
Okay,
discussion.
so what if the person says that this has, I bric-a-brac up on the top of the roof? I think I used this example 3 times, okay?
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, or the star bolt or whatever.
Okay, so you're a class 2 property.
Now you've just restricted that person. He can't demolish it. He can't.
It doesn't, no, that's what I'm saying.
No, I think you're looking at it in a vacuum. And I
I'm
don't
not,
think you're looking at
I'm
it-
telling you what the ordinance,
I
This
think
is what
that
I'm
there
suggesting
there's
to you.
Plenty of literature that describes that you can't restrict a property owner's right to use his property without just compensation.
I'm
And
not,
I think
no, that's not accurate. You
That's what
can't-
it's going to.
You can't take away the right to use the
To
economic
enjoy.
use of it.
Enjoy.
Right.
Enjoy the use.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Well, no,
whatever
you
it
have
is.
to talk about condemnation. It's the property is essentially not usable anymore. But that's not what this is. This is what I'm telling you, and I don't think everybody's listening to me. If everybody let's all do this. Let's all take one breath.
cooling down
Or
period.
just one breath. No, listen what I'm saying. Class 2. I get it. You don't want to restrict the person's ability to demolish the class 2. There's restriction and there's prohibition. What I'm telling you is, assume, this is what it says. It's a cooling off period that you can't demolish a class 2 resource without waiting 50 days. And that's it. That's the only restriction. You have a problem with that?
I'll tell you what I have a problem with.
No, I don't.
Okay, does anybody have a problem if it's a 50-day restriction?
If that's it,
Okay, now, does anybody have a problem if it's a 70-day restriction?
What goes on more than that?
Well,
Eric?
does anybody have a problem if it's a 100-day restriction? But in that time frame, you have to go before the planning commission and jump through, not the planning commission, the historical commission, and jump, no more for you, and jump through certain hoops and show the planning commission what you intend to do and allow them to give you suggestions, feedback, offer assistance, provide you with resources to the extent available, and then you still get to do what you want to do anyway. Does anybody have an objection to that? It's just a cooling off period with an education process and a
so
hearing
is this
process.
basically like, hey, we really don't want you to do
Yes.
that? Like,
Yes.
and it's just a window of time for the township to be able to maybe convince them to
Yes.
not do it?
Yes, and to the extent there's grants. or
I'm not a
anything-
lawyer.
Yeah.
I don't I'm not gonna try and be one. I just would want, if that's what.
That's the intent of this is to say, class 1 resource, you can't knock it down unless the Court of Common Pleas tells us you're able to knock it down because of some overarching reason. That's
So
like 5 or
that's
6
not what this
properties,
says, though.
half of which are owned by the rest of it is, the process is, it's a hearing process, it's a recommendation process, but in the end, the homeowner's gonna be able to do what they get to do.
Okay, so
That's the intent of this.
Can I may be misreading this. That might be where part of my hangup is. This is page 12 at the
Yes.
top. This is, this particular paragraph is preceded with the number 3. It says, with respect to class 2 resources, the historical, this is after they've gone through the whole delay routine, okay,
Yep.
and seeking information. The historical commission shall provide its recommendation on issuance of a permit to the board of supervisors not later than the end of the applicable 105-day review period,
Yep.
as it might be extended. The board of supervisors shall approve the application for demolition in accordance above within the 105 period, whether it
Yep.
receives recommendation. So they shall approve, like,
Right,
but
So-
what if they don't approve?
right. What's
So
that?
whether the corollary is not listed here.
Right.
So if they don't approve,
They
it just go on into
they
demolish.
can't stop it.
They can't stop it.
You can't stop you. All they can do. Now, I will tell you, this was, like I said, adopted from other ordinances that were much more restrictive and that had the same problems that Paul keeps talking about. And I took all that stuff out of there, by the way, because I knew that there was no chance in hell that the planning commission was going to want to restrict the class 2 resources from ultimately doing what they want to do. And I didn't think the board of supervisors was going to do it. So I took that out. Now, so what I grant you, we could clarify paragraphs, because, so on page 12, when you're at subparagraph 3, right?
Mhm.
H, 1, 2, 3.
Mhm.
We get to I, historical commission recommendation.
Mhm.
We could clarify that, at the end of that process, the homeowner's considered to, encouraged to listen to the recommendations, and that's period. The commission shall communicate its recommendation we could just say right there at number 2, to the homeowner, which recommendation shall not be binding. We could clarify that. The ordinance doesn't give the authority to do anything further other than make a recommendation. It's class 1, the next paragraph, where it's much more restrictive on your rights. And that's that much smaller group. So that's all this is intended to do right now is say, if you're class 2, if you're finally designated class 2, the township went through those hoops to put you on that class 2 list. You got to come in for a cooling off period and listen to us, jump through some hoops to make sure that we know what it is you're trying to demolish. Let us tell you how you can protect that. Let us bring any resources to bear to help you if you wish to. And if not, do what it is you got to do. Now, do I think that's what the Historical Society wanted? No, that's not what it said. Do I think the Historical Society is not going to like this? Yeah, I think they're not going to like this. But based on my understanding of the feedback from the board, that's where I thought you were intended to go.
I have another clarifying question. Wait, actually, so when they're, if you back up earlier in the process of class 2, which is on page 10, section D,
Yes.
in this section, it's a review process by the Historic Commission, and they're trying to gather information about the
Yes.
property and about the situation. So
Yes.
that's the context. So who is this saying, this is the Historical Commission shall consider the following and enumerate 7 items. So they're responsible for gathering that information. They're not going to put that burden on the owner.
Only if it's the owner who wants
Who
to,
wants.
right.
Wait,
Now,
the owner who wants to,
be on the list. There's no burden on the homeowner to
no,
come.
this is, they're on the list. Somehow they got on the list. So that's the other discussion. So let's,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
just,
Yes.
somehow
Yes.
they got on the list.
Yes.
So if they got on the list because they put themselves there, then that's on them.
Yes.
If they got on the list because somebody else put them there, now my question is, well, then who's responsible for gathering all this economic feasibility,
Commission.
demolition resources? Is this
Commission.
the commission?
Absolutely.
Well, it's going to be, the commission's got to consider it. The homeowner's going to have to cooperate.
Is going to have to.
Is going to have to.
How are
I
you
have to
cooperating? You're gonna
demonstrate that I
subpoena powers to the
considered
commission?
everything.
What's that?
I have to demonstrate X, Y, and Z.
That I think that if this is
No way.
valuable historic property, then the
Right.
historical commission should gather this information.
Well,
And
how are they gonna
defend their
get it?
I
position.
mean, they can make their arguments, but I.
Sure, right. So, and these are some of the subtleties that I just want to be mindful of as we go
Yeah.
through this.
Well, I mean, and that's what you can do that. I mean,
It sounds
I don't,
like they are expecting it to come from the applicant.
Yeah.
If it's the
I mean, if you-
owner.
if you don't wanna-
they
if you
say
don't- if you wanna
determine
redu-
additional information.
Well, if you want to
that is
reduce the
needed
burden, reduce the
from
burden. But the
applicant
idea is,
to-
Right,
they got to give you the
my point.
information necessary to help you
But
help them make
the
their
next-
recommendation.
This is why I wrote that
Yeah.
down and I
Rich,
was just
let me-
reminded is section E says, when the commission determines additional information is needed from the applicant in order to adequately address, they're going to basically request the applicant to provide in 30 days. Now the burden's coming back on the demolition person to
Yes.
put all economic feasibility about all the alternatives, what the resources they have. So in this situation, what's now happening is instead of
But it-
cooling off period,
But that
now
was-
you've got to go do a lot of analysis on your own property to defend what you don't want to do. It's sort of like, why
So-
incriminate yourself?
So
I don't
right now,
understand
we
this.
don't have any alternative uses. If you are in a district that is a residential.
Number
district,
4, alternative to demolition of the resource.
I understand what it says here. It's allowing for, if we were to add another use today.
Well, no, but this is also,
That's the
this also
point.
is. no, this-
After the fact, that's exactly the concern we have. There's 2 issues. One, how do you get on the list? Put that aside. Now, what do you do with the list after they're on the list and they go, oh, is that what you're going to add?
But let me just give you a
Yeah.
fact. This is
And then
really
and there's a
critical fact.
hearing, and
Just
people have a right
listen.
to come in and stop them.
Listen to this. There are 2,562 municipalities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. 294, or 11%, have historic ordinances. The other 89% don't.
Mhm.
And the reason that they don't is for the same reasons that we're discussing here tonight. They are not favored.
I'm not advocating for this. I was tasked to do this.
You're not selling it. You're not selling it.
Let me-
You're not selling it.
I'm just
The
telling
Board
you
of
what's in it. I
Supervisors-
want to make sure that you understand what it says and what it doesn't say.
Right, you want us to have clarity.
Clarity. Whether it meets your goals or not is a different issue. You got to clearly convey to me what your goal is, and then I will go make those changes. And then I could go to the Board of Supervisors and say, the Planning Commission made a recommendation. Hey, they don't want a historic preservation ordinance, period. That's what happened before. 15, 20 years ago, this came up through the Planning Commission and it died an unholy death.
Off the cuff, from my perspective,
Yeah.
if there's a homeowner or a property owner that wants their property preserved and restored, there should there should be a process that allows them to do it
Mhm.
and protect it forever. If that's their choice to want to do it.
Mhm.
I don't think any township should be taking anybody's property and making it, when it's not
You're
already.
absolutely entitled to that.
So,
Okay. Legally, you can do it.
right,
If philosophically you don't want to do it,
And
could
that is
just-
not an attack.
You as a
on-
board can simply make a recommendation 3-2. I don't want to have to sit here and revise the thing and spend township money revising it. If in the end you're saying, we don't want to do this. But I would go back to the board of supervisors and say, planning commission doesn't think you should do this, period.
So the question really we're being asked is, do we in some way
Yeah.
want to
And
preserve
But
historical
there should be a
resources?
process to
Yep.
allow
If we
someone to
do,
put the
How
what are
does
the
that-
things
Okay with
that are in here that
We would like to adjust.
That's right.
we would like
That's all
to
you-
adjust?
That's all you got to do.
So-
Give me your goals as a board, not individual concerns, and say, yeah, we want you to go back and make class 2 purely voluntary.
So we beat you up enough tonight. Do you want us to vote on this tonight?
Nope.
Or do you want us to come back to you next month?
I don't
and
think
show
there's,
you-
I don't think it's gonna go well.
Yeah, and yeah.
What does that mean? That like
If I
next
can,
meeting?
let me just say, the board is interested in something.
I know
Okay,
that.
and we don't want to rush it if it's not ready, okay? But if the change that you want to make is that you want class 2 to be totally voluntary, and you're okay with everything else, if that's the only change, then I think you could make that recommendation to Rich. We could put it together and take it before the board for advertising and do it as a public process, okay? And let me just say this, the board, and let me explain why I'm even saying that. The board passed a resolution in May to move forward with sustainability in the township. And one of the pieces is having a historic commission. And so I know several board members are interested in doing that because of feeling like that's part of the process.
Well, we can do
But-
that
Yeah.
without, so this is one ordinance modifying multiple parts of our code.
Correct.
All right. If you look, paragraph or section 93, like chapter 93, that's historic preservation. All that essentially does is set up who the lists are, how you get on the list, not what you do once you're on the list. Chapter 69, that has to do with all the permitting process, the delay of permits and everything else. If you just want to focus on chapter 93, creating the historical society or the historical commission, A, and B, telling us what it is they do, and then C, defining the list, now you get on the list. That's a much, there's no impact other than you're on a list.
93 does though say what demolition is, and it includes that it's 50% or more.
That's
and
right, but it
can
doesn't
be
restrict demolition.
Removal or stripping
Oh, it's
of
voluntary.
any architecturally significant exterior features. So
But it doesn't,
it is not only demolition,
I
there's
don't
another
disagree
part
with
to it.
Yeah.
that's right.
But if
So just, if I'm understanding here, it does, 93 does
Life's full of choices.
refer to the demolition part of it.
No, but it
It's
doesn't,
not.
but it doesn't impact, it just defines.
It doesn't give the, it doesn't
Right.
say what happens after we say it's demolition.
Exactly. It just defines it. And then, because in the other chapters is where you have to, all the other chapters refer back to this chapter.
It seems that this is mainly concerned about the demolition of properties that are considered historic.
That's what the purpose is.
And there, I know are a lot of concerns about people wanting to be able to do what they want to do with their property. And if demolition is the focus of this, then the issue is how much of an issue is that to everybody? And maybe it's a big issue.
It might be, but I don't see how it is if truly,
I don't know.
if it's a class 2, you have a delay process and you got to jump through some hoops and come in and talk to the folks before you get to do what it is you're going to do anyway. Or class 1, you're restricted as you are now.
So I think it's a little, so back, Steve, to your question, I think it's a little bit more than what you just articulated. If I look at page 10, and now there's a burden being put on the owner to defend, to do all this, he's got to make the case for and against himself.
But that's if you get to the demolition
Yeah.
stage.
I think that we can do a lot of this. I think if we look at it, I think we can make recommendations that would be very close to
Helpful.
what Steve is looking for.
Page
what the
10
Board of
is,
Supervisors-
page 10, by the way, is the building permit code. That,
Permit for a demolition.
That's for demolition.
it's a whole different,
Right. That's a
Yeah.
whole different part.
yeah, a new, right, so if you go to page 1 through 8, that's creation of the lists. It's creation of the historical commission, creation of the list essentially. That's what they do. 69, chapter 16, section 69, right? That starts on page 9.
9.
A new section 69.61 is added. So this has to do with our codes, our permits. So this is a whole different section. This is no longer chapter 90.
So we can carve that out.
Yeah, and then then we went on further, right?
Goals.
If you go to chapter 13, if you go to page 13, that's chapter 172. That's an amendment to our zoning code,
Yeah.
right? So there's 3 sections of the township code covered in one giant ordinance, all related to historical preservation. What I'm suggesting is we could get rid of any impact on permits, any impact on zoning, period. Just create the commission and create the process for putting properties on a list. But there's no impact to doing that other than
what's
It's on the list.
surprised down the road.
the only property that would be impacted, if you only adopted chapter 93, you only recommended chapter 93, the only possible impact would be designation of a class 1 property. Because if it's a class 1 property, we have an existing zoning section that prohibits the demolition for a class 1 property already. So the only thing here is we've clarified the process on how you become a class 1 or not become a class 1. We didn't have that before. Before we just basically said Secretary of Interior or Historic Register, you're on it. So it would really have minimal impact if you just did the chapter 93 look, which is only the first 8 pages.
8 in a sentence.
Yeah.
And if I read this correctly, the owner can challenge why their property should be on this list. of
Either way,
historic
they could say we should or should not be on
Should or
this.
should not be on.
Yeah, well, I don't see any benefit to a homeowner saying, I want to be on this list unless we are granting some sort of process, right? Why would anybody just say, I want to do this? We don't, because that's not what we're doing here. So, but in the future, if you wanted to add that, there might be plenty of folks. Hey, I got this beautiful house, Victorian house, and I think it would be a beautiful bed and breakfast. I want my house to be on the class 2 list because you're allowing bed and breakfast use, and I want to be able to use it. I want to take advantage of that.
But we're not there.
We're not there. And if we got there, there would be a conditional use process. And there would have to be notice to the neighbors and all kind of stuff.
So I wonder whether people on the commission are comfortable with approving just the commission to be able to identify historic properties and allow owners to object if they don't think that's appropriate.
That's not how.
Well, I'm saying take off the back part.
Yeah, just
So
the first
make it
8 pages,
voluntary.
basically.
The historic commission can propose, hey, homeowner, did you realize we have these attributes? They appear historic. We'd like to consider you a class 2. Are you in? Are you not? And they say, well, what's in it for me? Oh, there's really nothing. You just get to go on a list. Okay.
Is that it?
For now, that's it.
Yeah,
That's the way our government works, though. It's always for now.
for now.
I would add one thing. I think I could be okay with section 93, top of page 7, historic resource if it meets one or more of the following criteria. I think I'd like to see 2.
Why don't we?
I want to see them have to
Let's
make
take-
a
let's take some
case,
time to
not
read
just
this
we
and
like your little
digest.
gingerbread on the one part of the roof.
Let's read it and then
Come back.
schedule time next month
I'm
and
okay
we
with
can have
Yeah,
discussions
I
on
think
it.
so. I think we need to digest this, understand the comments we've received, that there's been very clarity. We've heard each other. But I think I would like to go back. and
We're not in a
do-
rush on anything, are we?
I think-
Well, what's
Or
the
is somebody
what's the
in a rush?
there's a
designation
desire
process?
to get it done.
You said there's.
I don't care. I mean,
I'm not, it's not.
we're not in a rush, are we?
Well, there was just the
Or what?
one.
Look, I don't want to put you in a position that you're uncomfortable, and I think that for me to ask you to take even the first step, there's some people who want to still do more review. And so I'd rather you take your steps. I know the board is ready to take action on this if you send it to them. That doesn't mean they're going to approve it as is. I'm not saying that. But I think they want to hear from you. I would not want to see this be a 6-month process. I don't think that's what they want. But if you need more time to review it more. I think you should take the time, and we will meet in November. Just a reminder, our November meeting is on a Tuesday, not a Thursday, because
Tuesday,
I'm getting ready to
22nd.
pull it
Second,
right
I
up.
think it is.
that would be the,
Tuesday,
6th
November
is the-
23rd.
okay, yeah.
I think I need to open it up because my brain doesn't think, but yep. My phone
Tuesday is
doesn't-
the 23rd.
Yeah, it's the 23rd.
I got two questions. So number one, if I'm going to modify anything before we come back,
Also.
you were only looking at chapter 93, is that correct?
I wouldn't spend the time to monitor.
Well, because here's the thing, if it's voluntary, and this is my next question is, we're only looking at chapter 93, is that correct?
I think that's the consensus.
I mean,
Or
I don't have an
willing
issue of
consensus.
just looking at it at all. I don't have an
Well,
issue with
okay,
that.
all right, so,
Okay,
because I want to be able to look at what you've talked about tonight and read through it and see if there's just anything that low hanging fruit that I could just come back next month and say, hey, I can give you something to look at. So number one, we're still looking at the whole thing perhaps. Number two, it would be helpful if there was three of you to tell me, is class 2 voluntary or not voluntary? If it's purely voluntary, it's only at the request of the homeowner to be put on this list, I suggest to you that all the criteria to get, that the board can consider to put it on the list don't matter because it's voluntary. If you are going to say it's not voluntary, then you could focus on the list of criteria more, right?
I would just nuance that to say there needs to be a standard for what is historical. Whether somebody wants to go through the burden of being historical or the advantage of being historical, it's going to slice both ways. They have to concede to that, but there does need for the township.
Well, there is, it's in there.
Right, so we do need those criteria.
No, I'm suggesting that you could spend less time on it if it's voluntary.
Yes.
I think it would be easier to do, you set it up in pieces. And it feels to me like this could be 2 pieces, be 93 in the rest. I made my comment about making it 2 and not 1. I might agree with you wholeheartedly, but I kind of would like to see how it's working thus far before I say, yeah, 1 works out fine because it's discretionary. Because it doesn't, it changes. All of a sudden, it's not discretionary because the supervisors at some point in time change it.
It can always change it. All of this could be changed.
Would it help if some of the criteria for designation were narrowed a bit, so it's not quite so broad?
just
why I
remember,
would like a month
if it
to
is
read it.
changed, not 93, because I think 93 stands on its own, but section 69 and for sure, section 172 have to go back through this process. It comes
Is
to
there
you.
like some impending
goes back.
demolition that we're not aware of, that we're trying to get this on?
There's a
the
lot of
floor?
pressure on this.
Yeah, there's. a
It really
tremendous
feels,
amount.
it's 10 o'clock. And it really does feel like there's a lot of pressure on this to.
That's why I'm backing off. I'm saying.
I know. I'm
Well,
saying,
there was a.
why are
goal.
we still?
There was
Well,
pressure last
there
time.
is pressure. He's saying he doesn't want to put it on you, but there was there was.
I
a
know we
goal.
want to get it done.
Yeah,
There
no,
was
he didn't
pressure
just want to
last
get it
time.
done. There was a reason he wanted to get it done, right?
Right.
There was,
Yeah.
what's the reason he wanted to get it done?
So the reason is this matters as we move forward in our sustainability movement. That's part of the pressure. But
What
I'm
does that
telling-
do for us, the sustainability move?
We're moving towards the sustainability PA is a full review of the township, looking at how we set up for making sure that the township's sustainable. And when I say that, it's more than just environmental. It's more than just are we green? Are we all those things? It looks at our finances. It looks at how we take care of historic resources. It looks how we.
So this sustainability
Business
package boils down
sustainability,
to
everything.
money.
Excuse me?
Does it get back to
What's the
money
benefit
from
of
the
it?
state?
It does not necessarily get back to money
Tax
from the state,
credits.
but what it does probably do for us is that when we file for grants related to sustainability efforts, we're able to say we're participating and we're at a bronze level, we're at
Okay.
a silver level, we're at a gold level, we're at a
Makes sense.
platinum level.
Makes sense.
I don't think today, it's not like I can go out and get money from this, but I do think it helps you in the grant process when you tie it back and to go back to who we had 10 members of our community spend about a year and a half putting a strategic plan together. And this is part of the strategic plan as well. This was a piece that came out of the strategic plan. The community said, we want to preserve historic
So
resources.
there's no reason, so what's the push on not allowing us to have the 30 days just to read this?
No, he's
No,
good
he
with
said
it.
he's fine with it.
He's good with it.
He's all good.
He's good
He
with it.
said there's no push. He asked, he said he sensed that there was some sort
Good.
of a pressure.
If you
And I
were
was-
ready to move forward, I wanted to move forward.
I'm a little worried about one thing about November, that Tuesday, right, that the meeting is.
Uh-huh.
Can't be there. I may not be able to be there. Shimon's missed a couple. Can we move it the week after?
Or how about the week before, 18th?
Yeah, the
I
18th
can't
versus.
move it the week before. Because that's the zoning hearing board.
I just wouldn't want to be in a position where we set it for that and then
Missing all
we
these
can't even have it. Like, because 3 people are missing.
Yeah, I mean, it was what we advertised at the beginning of the year.
Right, right.
and
It's
that's-
always been that. We've done that every year.
But if
we moved it.
if we can't make it, we'll have to talk about when you can, because I'm gonna have to find another date. So, because like the 18th is the zoning hearing board. The 11th is the shade tree. If I keep
Well,
it on.
we could do it Wednesday, the 17th,
How about Monday,
or Monday.
the 22nd?
Monday, the
Supervisors.
22nd is a board meeting.
Oh, well, I guess we can't do it then.
I have to tell you, I live here, so it's, I could
Yeah, right.
potentially,
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I could do the 25th.
Does the 17th work at all?
I could potentially, I think, do the 17th.
Others do 17th?
That'd be good with,
It's a Wednesday.
A Wednesday?
I could force it.
I
You could
I
make
say
that
that,
work.
there's one
Yeah,
other
right.
thing that may happen that day, but I'll look and we'll get an email out and see what works for you as a group. I
I'm
also
good
will
on
have
that,
to
yeah.
see. Do we have, Heather, do we have anything that has come in to be on the agenda for the planning commission other than this?
For November,
SAP is on the agenda. So I have to look at how we have to do that. So let me look at that. Have we distributed those documents yet? Okay, so,
Yeah, we saw,
Okay.
I saw.
we saw.
okay,
SAP
so,
seems
so
straightforward.
that is before you next month. I just need to look at the schedule to see if we move it one way or the other, how does that impact our third parties in doing all the reviews that need to be done?
yeah.
So let me do that. I will get back to you. We will schedule a time that works. And so Heather, I'm going to ask you to help me work on getting that done. Okay.
And I'm not making any changes to this ordinance.
No, I
right?
will.
I don't want to come back and you guys say, wait, it still says the same thing.
We like, look at we liked it the old way.
Right. I will say, one homeowner with a historic property saw, we actually on the website to authorize sending it to you guys. The board, the township actually published the old historical society version. And a homeowner called, or emailed and said, this is not a good idea and I'm against this. So I said, oh, it was a mistake. This is the actual ordinance that's being forwarded to the planning commission. He said, thanks. And I haven't had any negative feedback from him. In addition, some of the other folks who were objecting in the past.
This clearly is lighter than
Yeah,
what was there
And
before.
there's been no objections from, I forwarded to some other folks too, just to say, look, as a courtesy, I know you had an interest in it and they haven't objected to anything either. So I think it's, I'm not saying it's there. I think it's headed in the right direction. If
Making progress.
All right.
What I would ask is just we're here at 10 o'clock at night. And so knowing that we're going to have SAP in front of you next time, it's probably going to take a little bit, yeah, I think it's 7,000 square foot addition. So it's not really changing their footprint very much. But you're still going to want to get the due diligence.
Yeah.
So what would be helpful, running this, if without going as a copying all, if you could just send an email to Rich and about the things that you would want us to be prepared to talk about and or have language that we might change, understanding that you all may not be in agreement, but that we would be prepared. The process ways to deal with it so that we could kind of tackle it in a structured way to help you get through it. If we can get through it the next time, if it needs to go another time, it goes another time. Okay, but it's just using your time the best while we're together so that it's not another hour and a half doing this.
Fair enough.
We don't want to do that. If you give us that ahead of time, you'll help us be prepared.
Okay.
You guys wanna start over?
Oh, the tape was off. We gotta do that again. How do we have a motion?
To adjourn?
To adjourn.
Motion.
Second? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Jack.
I would just make note to everyone, there is a possibility, if we have to meet in December. We're hoping that you don't have to meet in December, but if we have to meet in December, we will be meeting someplace else. Just don't know exactly where. So just know that that's going to be the case. This
Casey's?
room- huh?
Casey's.
I'll vote for that.
This room is going to be full of library books because we are recarpeting the library in December.